Hello friends. Did you know nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps. Thank you for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I've been driving rigs for 23 years now, and in all that time, I've learned one thing that matters more than anything else. The road doesn't care about you. It doesn't care about your schedule, your deadlines, your family waiting back home, or the bills piling up on your kitchen table. The road is just there, stretching out mile after mile, and it's up to you to survive it. My name is Reuben Lawton, and I haul freight across the American Southwest, mostly between Las Vegas and Phoenix, sometimes pushing further east into New Mexico or north into Utah. I've seen things out there that I can't explain, things that make me question whether the road is as empty as it looks in the rearview mirror. But what happened to me on Highway 93 last October changed everything I thought I knew about driving alone at night. It was a Tuesday when I picked up the load in Henderson, just outside Vegas. The dispatcher had called me in early because one of the regular guys had called out sick, and they needed someone to take 40,000 pounds of industrial equipment down to a construction site in Wickenburg, Arizona. It wasn't my usual route, but the money was good, and I'd driven that stretch of 93 enough times to know what I was getting into. The highway cuts through some of the most desolate country you'll ever see. Nothing but desert scrub, distant mountains, and the occasional ghost town that looks like it hasn't seen a living soul in 50 years. During the day, it's beautiful in a stark, lonely kind of way. At night, it's something else entirely. I left Henderson around 6 in the evening, figuring I'd make Wickenburg by midnight if I kept a steady pace. The sun was already low in the sky, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple, and I remember thinking how peaceful it all looked. I had my thermos of coffee, a bag of beef jerky, and a playlist of old country songs queued up on my phone. Everything felt normal. Everything felt routine. I'd made runs like this 100 times before, and there was no reason to think this one would be any different. But the desert has a way of keeping secrets, and that night it decided to show me one of them. The first hour passed without incident. I crossed Hoover Dam, which is always a surreal experience at twilight. All that concrete holding back an impossible weight of water, the lights of the dam reflecting off Lake Mead like scattered stars. Then I was out on the open highway, the last traces of civilization fading in my mirrors as the road climbed into the hills. The radio stations started to drop out one by one, replaced by static and the occasional fragment of a Spanish-language broadcast from somewhere across the border. I switched to my playlist and let Johnny Cash keep me company as the darkness settled in. It was just past 8 o'clock when I noticed the first set of headlights behind me. That's not unusual on Highway 93. It's a major trucking route, and you're bound to have company even at odd hours. But something about these lights caught my attention. They were sitting about a quarter-mile back, keeping a steady distance, and they weren't getting any closer or falling any further behind. That's strange behavior for another trucker. Usually, if someone's faster than you, they'll come up and pass. If they're slower, they'll gradually fade away in the distance. These lights just hung there, like they were tethered to the back of my trailer. I adjusted my side mirror and tried to get a better look at the vehicle, but all I could see were those headlights. 2 bright white dots cutting through the darkness. No running lights, no outline of a cab or trailer. Just the lights. I figured it was probably just another driver on cruise control, matching my speed by coincidence, and I put it out of my mind. The desert was quiet, the road was empty, and I had a delivery to make. I took a sip of coffee and kept my eyes forward. About 20 minutes later, I looked in the mirror again and felt a cold prickle at the back of my neck. The first set of lights was still there, exactly where it had been before. But now there were 2 more sets behind it, arranged in a perfect line, all 3 of them maintaining the same distance from my trailer and from each other. 3 trucks, all running without their marker lights, all keeping formation like some kind of military convoy. In 23 years of driving, I'd never seen anything like it. I reached for the CB radio and clicked it on, scanning through the channels to see if I could raise any of the drivers behind me. The radio had been quiet all night, not unusual for this stretch of road, but now it seemed almost aggressively silent, the static humming with an empty, expectant quality that made my skin crawl. I keyed the mic and spoke into it, my voice sounding strange and hollow in the dark cab. "This is Lawton, northbound on 93 approaching Dolan Springs. I've got 3 trucks on my tail running without markers. You boys want to identify yourselves?" I released the key and waited. The static hummed. Nothing else came back. I tried again on a different channel, then another, working my way through the frequencies. The silence was absolute. It was like the radio waves themselves had been swallowed up by the desert. I clicked off the CB and gripped the wheel a little tighter, telling myself there was nothing to worry about. Maybe the other drivers just didn't have their radios on. Maybe they were running silent because they didn't want to be bothered. There were a dozen reasonable explanations, and I went through all of them in my head, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. But there was a knot forming in my stomach that wouldn't go away. A primal instinct telling me that something was wrong. The road curved around a rocky outcropping, and for a moment the headlights behind me disappeared from view. I felt a brief surge of relief, like maybe I'd just imagined the whole thing. Then I came out of the curve and checked my mirror, and the lights were there again. All 3 sets, still in formation, still maintaining that same precise distance. They hadn't fallen behind during the curve the way normal traffic would. They'd matched my line exactly, as if they were attached to invisible cables running from the back of my trailer. I decided to test them. I eased off the accelerator, letting my speed drop from 65 to 55, watching the mirror as I did. The lights behind me slowed in perfect sync, maintaining their distance without so much as a wobble. Then I pressed down on the gas, bringing my speed back up to 65, then 70, pushing the engine harder than I probably should have with a full load. The lights matched me step for step, staying exactly where they'd been before. It was like they weren't being driven at all, like they were just following, the way your shadow follows you when you walk across a parking lot. That's when the CB crackled to life. I'd left it on, scanning through channels in the background, and suddenly there was a voice coming through the speaker. Low, measured, and completely calm. "Keep your lane," the voice said. There was a burst of static, then the voice came again. "You're not alone." I grabbed the mic and keyed it immediately. "Who is this? Identify yourself." The static swelled for a moment, almost like it was breathing, and then it settled back to its usual hum. No response came. I stared at the radio, waiting for the voice to come back, but the channel stayed silent. The words kept echoing in my head. "Keep your lane, you're not alone," and I didn't know whether to feel reassured or terrified. The phrasing was ambiguous, like it could have been a warning or a threat. And the voice itself had been strange, toneless and flat, without any of the regional accents or vocal quirks you'd expect from another trucker. It sounded almost mechanical, like someone reading from a script. I kept driving, because what else was I going to do? Pull over on a deserted highway in the middle of the night with 3 unknown vehicles on my tail? That didn't seem like a good idea. The smart move was to keep moving, get to a populated area, and figure out what was going on from there. There was a rest stop about 30 miles ahead, near the turnoff for chloride. I decided I'd pull in there, park under the lights where I could see anyone who approached, and try to get a look at whoever was following me. The miles ticked by slowly. Every few minutes I'd check the mirror, and every time the lights were still there, unchanged, unwavering. I tried the CB again a couple of times, but I never got a response. The silence was oppressive, like a physical weight pressing down on the cab. I turned off my music and just listened to the engine, the hum of the tires on the pavement, the occasional gust of wind pushing against the trailer. Normal sounds, familiar sounds, but they didn't comfort me the way they usually did. The turnoff or the rest stop appeared in my headlights like a small miracle. I flipped on my signal, force of habit, even though there was supposedly no traffic around, and began to slow down for the exit. I was watching the mirror as I did, and what I saw made my breath catch in my throat. The 3 sets of headlights behind me had also begun to slow, their brake lights flaring red for the first time since I'd noticed them. They were following me off the highway. I pulled into the rest stop and swung my rig into the truck parking area, choosing a spot directly under one of the sodium lights where I'd have good visibility in all directions. I set the brake and killed the engine, then sat there in the sudden silence, watching my mirrors and waiting to see what happened next. The access road from the highway curved through a stand of scraggly trees before opening up into the parking lot, so I couldn't see the other vehicles until they were almost on top of me. A minute passed, then another. The trees at the edge of the parking lot stood motionless in the still air, their branches throwing twisted shadows across the pavement. The rest stop was deserted. No other trucks, no cars, just a small brick building with restrooms and a couple of vending machines glowing faintly in the darkness. I kept my eyes on the access road, waiting for those headlights to appear. They never did. After 5 minutes, I got out of the cab and walked around to the back of my trailer, scanning the road for any sign of the trucks that had been following me. The highway was visible from where I stood, a dark ribbon cutting through the desert, and there was nothing on it. No headlights, no tail lights, no movement of any kind. It was like the 3 trucks had simply evaporated the moment I pulled off the road. I stood there for a long time, the night air cool against my face, trying to understand what I'd just experienced. The desert wind made a low, mournful sound as it swept across the empty parking lot, carrying with it the smell of sage and dust, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Something faintly metallic, like old rust or dried blood. I told myself I was imagining things, that the stress of the drive was making me paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched from somewhere out there in the darkness. I walked over to the restroom building, more to have something to do than because I actually needed to use the facilities. The door was unlocked, the interior lit by a single flickering fluorescent tube that cast everything in a sickly greenish glow. The place smelled like industrial cleaner and old cigarette smoke, and there was graffiti on the walls, the usual crude drawings and obscene messages, plus a few things that caught my attention. Someone had written, "They follow but never pass," in black marker above one of the sinks. Below it, in different handwriting, was the phrase, "Keep your lane." I stared at those words for a long time, feeling the hair stand up on the back of my neck. It was the same phrase the voice on the radio had used. I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence, that "keep your lane" was a common enough expression among truckers, that someone had probably written it there as a joke or a piece of general advice. But standing in that dingy restroom in the middle of nowhere, with the fluorescent light buzzing overhead and the desert wind howling outside, I couldn't make myself believe it. I went back to my truck and sat in the cab with the doors locked, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to call someone, my wife, my dispatcher, the highway patrol, but I didn't know what I would say. That I'd been followed by 3 trucks that had disappeared. That someone had said cryptic things to me over the CB. That I'd found graffiti in a restroom that spooked me. None of it sounded like anything worth reporting. None of it sounded like anything at all, really, except the paranoid ramblings of a tired driver who'd been on the road too long. I decided to push on to Wickenburg and make my delivery. Whatever had happened on the highway was over now, and the best thing I could do was put it behind me and focus on the job. I started the engine, pulled out of the rest stop, and merged back onto Highway 93, keeping my speed steady and my eyes on the road ahead. For the first few miles, everything was quiet. The highway stretched out before me like a black river, the desert rolling away on either side into infinite darkness. I started to relax, started to convince myself that I'd let my imagination run away with me, that there was nothing out there except the road and the night and the long miles between me and my destination. Then I looked in the mirror. The 3 sets of headlights were back. They were sitting about a quarter mile behind me, arranged in their perfect formation, maintaining the same precise distance they'd kept before I pulled off at the rest stop. It was like they'd been waiting for me out there in the darkness, like they'd known exactly when I would return to the highway and had positioned themselves to resume their pursuit. My hands tightened on the wheel until my knuckles went white, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead despite the air conditioning blowing full blast in my face. I grabbed the CB mic and keyed it without thinking about what I was going to say. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" The static hissed and crackled, and then the voice came back. The same voice as before, low and flat, and completely devoid of emotion. "Keep your lane, Lawton. You're not alone." It knew my name. The voice on the radio knew my name, even though I hadn't identified myself except at the very beginning of the night, hours and miles ago. I felt something cold crawl down my spine, a fear that went beyond rational thought and touched something primal and ancient in the deepest part of my brain. This wasn't just strange anymore. This was something else entirely, something that didn't fit into any category I had for understanding the world. I drove faster, pushing the engine toward its limits, watching the speedometer climb past 70, past 75, past 80. The trailer was swaying behind me, and I knew I was taking a dangerous risk with that much weight at that speed. But I didn't care. I just wanted to get away from those lights, to put enough distance between us that they couldn't follow anymore. But no matter how fast I went, the lights stayed with me. They matched my speed exactly, maintaining their formation, never falling back and never gaining ground. It was like they were playing with me, like they wanted me to know that I couldn't escape no matter what I did. The highway began to descend into a wide valley, and I could see the lights of a small town in the distance. Kingman, probably, or one of the little communities that dot the Arizona border. Civilization. Safety. I told myself that if I could just make it there, whatever was following me would have to stop. It couldn't pursue me into a populated area where other people would see it, where I could get help and find out what was going on. I pressed the accelerator all the way to the floor and felt the truck surge forward, eating up the miles between me and those distant lights. I was still 10 miles from the town when the voice came over the radio again. "You can't outrun us, Lawton. You can't leave us behind. We're with you now. We've always been with you." The headlights behind me began to change. The 3 sets started to spread out, moving from their tight formation into a wider pattern that filled my mirrors with light. They were getting closer now, closing the gap that had remained constant for so long, and I could see the dark shapes of the trucks behind those lights for the first time. Black silhouettes against the darker night, massive and menacing and completely featureless. They had no company logos, no license plates, no identifying marks of any kind. They were just shapes, outlines, suggestions of trucks that might not have been trucks at all. The lead vehicle pulled up alongside me on the left, matching my speed exactly despite the fact that we were both pushing 90 miles an hour on a 2-lane highway. I looked over at the cab trying to see who was driving, but the windows were completely black, Not tinted, but black, as if there was nothing behind them at all. No driver, no interior, no indication that there was anything inside that truck except darkness. The second truck pulled up on my right, boxing me in between them. I could feel their presence like a physical pressure, could sense the mass of those rigs pushing against my truck from both sides. The third truck was still behind me, filling my mirrors with its headlights, and I realized that I was trapped. They had me surrounded, had cut off every avenue of escape, and there was nothing I could do except keep driving and hope that something changed before they decided to finish whatever they had started. "Keep your lane," the voice said again. "You're not alone." And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, all three trucks dropped back. They fell behind in perfect unison, their headlights receding in my mirrors until they were just distant points of light again, maintaining their original formation at a quarter-mile behind me. The pressure I'd felt on both sides vanished, and I was alone on the highway once more, my hands shaking on the wheel and my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I didn't slow down until I reached the outskirts of Kingman. I pulled into the first gas station I saw, parked under the brightest lights I could find, and sat there for 20 minutes trying to stop shaking. When I finally got out of the cab and looked back toward the highway, there was nothing there. The road was empty, the night was quiet, and those three sets of headlights were gone. I filled up my tank, bought a cup of coffee, and drove the rest of the way to Wickenburg without seeing another vehicle on the road. I made my delivery on time, turned in my paperwork, and headed back to Vegas as the sun was coming up. I told myself that it was over, that whatever had happened on Highway 93 was behind me now, and that I could go back to my normal life and forget the whole thing. But I couldn't forget. And 2 nights later, when I was making another run down the same highway, the headlights appeared again. The second time I saw them was on a Thursday night, 2 days after the first encounter. I was hauling a load of produce from a distribution center in Bullhead City down to a grocery chain in Tucson. Different cargo, different route, different everything, except for those headlights that appeared in my mirrors about an hour after sunset, sitting a quarter-mile back in their perfect triangular formation. I recognized them immediately, the same way you'd recognize the face of someone who'd threatened you on the street. There was no mistaking them for ordinary traffic. They moved together too precisely, too deliberately, like 3 fingers on the same hand. I'd spent the previous 2 days trying to convince myself that the first incident had been some kind of hallucination, a product of fatigue and too many hours alone on the road. I'd even looked up the symptoms of highway hypnosis, wondering if I'd somehow entered a trance state that had made me see things that weren't there. But deep down, I knew better. Those trucks had been real. The voice on the radio had been real. And now they were back, which meant whatever had happened on Highway 93 wasn't a one-time occurrence. It was something else, something that had attached itself to me and wasn't planning to let go. I tried the CB radio as soon as I spotted them, cycling through channels and calling out for anyone who might be able to confirm what I was seeing. The airwaves were quiet, the same oppressive silence I'd experienced before, broken only by occasional bursts of static that seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat. I knew it was pointless, knew that whoever, or whatever, was controlling those trucks had somehow cut me off from the rest of the world. But I had to try. I had to do something besides sit there and wait for them to make their move. This is Lawton, southbound on 95 approaching Lake Havasu. I've got 3 vehicles on my tail running without markers. Anyone else seeing this, come back. Static, silence. Then, so faint I almost missed it, a whisper of sound that might have been words, or might have been nothing at all. I cranked up the volume and pressed the speaker against my ear, straining to hear. Not alone. Keep your lane. Not alone. The same message, repeated like a mantra, like a prayer. I threw the mic down and gripped the wheel with both hands, feeling the truck shudder slightly as a gust of desert wind pushed against the trailer. The headlights in my mirrors remained steady, unchanging, maintaining their distance with mechanical precision. I realized I was holding my breath and forced myself to exhale, to think, to figure out what I was going to do. My first instinct was to call Marlow Creek. Marlow was another driver who worked the same routes I did, a 20-year veteran with a reputation for having seen just about everything the road could throw at you. We'd helped each other out of jams more times than I could count over the years. Flat tires, engine trouble, way station hassles, all the usual problems that come with the job. If anyone would believe me about what was happening, it would be Marlow. And if anyone would know what to do about it, it would be him. I grabbed my cell phone and pulled up his number. But when I tried to call, the screen showed no signal. I checked the coverage map on my phone, and according to that, I should have had 3 or 4 bars in this area. But the phone was dead, just like the CB, just like everything else that might have connected me to the outside world. I was isolated, cut off, alone with those headlights and whatever was driving them. The highway curved around a rocky bluff, and for a few seconds the lights disappeared from my mirrors. I felt a surge of hope that maybe they'd given up, maybe they'd found someone else to follow. Maybe this whole nightmare was finally over. Then I came out of the curve and looked in the mirror, and my stomach dropped. They were still there, exactly where they'd been before, as if the curve had never happened at all. But now there were 4 of them. A 4th set of headlights had joined the formation, taking up position behind the original 3. They were arranged in a perfect diamond shape now, 4 points of light hanging in the darkness behind me like a constellation that had dropped out of the sky. I watched them for a long moment, feeling something cold settle into my chest. This wasn't just a repeat of what had happened 2 nights ago. It was escalating. I drove for another hour with those lights behind me, and during that hour I saw 2 more sets join the formation. 6 trucks now, all running without markers, all maintaining that same impossible precision in their spacing and speed. They never got closer and never fell back, never made any move that would explain what they wanted from me. They just followed, patient and relentless, like predators tracking wounded prey across the savannah. Around 10 o'clock I approached a truck stop I knew well, a big place with fuel islands, a restaurant, and usually plenty of other drivers around at this hour. I'd planned to bypass it and push on to Tucson, but with 6 trucks on my tail and no way to call for help, I decided to pull in and see what happened. If nothing else, there would be witnesses. If nothing else, I wouldn't be alone. I took the exit and pulled into the truck stop parking area, choosing a spot near the fuel islands where there were other trucks and plenty of light. I set the brake and killed the engine, then twisted around in my seat to look out the back window at the access road. I waited to see those headlights come around the curve, waited to finally get a clear look at the trucks that had been following me. They never came. I sat there for 10 minutes, watching the empty road, and not a single vehicle pulled into the truck stop behind me. The formation had dissolved the moment I left the highway, just like before. I got out of my cab and walked around to the back of my trailer, scanning the darkness for any sign of those 6 sets of headlights. The highway was visible in the distance, and there were a few cars and trucks passing by, their lights coming and going like normal traffic. But nothing that looked like the convoy that had been tailing me for the past 2 hours. I walked into the truck stop and ordered a cup of coffee at the counter, trying to gather my thoughts. The place was about half full, mostly drivers sitting alone in booths, eating late dinners or staring at their phones. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that something inexplicable was happening out there on the highway. I wanted to grab one of them and ask if they'd seen the trucks, if they'd noticed anything strange on the road tonight, but I knew how that would sound. I'd come across like a crazy person, like someone who'd been driving too long and had started seeing things. I was sitting at the counter staring into my coffee and trying to decide what to do, when a woman in a truck stop uniform approached me from behind the register. She was middle-aged with gray-streaked hair and a name tag that said Faye, and she was looking at me with an expression that was somewhere between concern and curiosity. "You doing okay, hun?" she asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. "Something like that. You wouldn't believe me if I told you." Faye tilted her head and studied me for a moment, like she was trying to make up her mind about something. Then she leaned in closer and lowered her voice. "You're not the first driver to come in here looking the way you do," she said. "Not the first one to come in here asking about trucks without markers, trucks that follow but never pass. We've been hearing stories like that for years now. More and more of them lately." I felt something shift in my chest, a combination of relief and dread. Relief because I wasn't crazy, because other people had seen what I was seeing. Dread because that meant it was real. It was actually happening, and I wasn't any closer to understanding what it was or what it wanted. "What do people say about them?" I asked. "The trucks, what do they say?" Faye glanced around the restaurant, making sure no one was listening. "They say they're ghosts. Drivers who died on the road and never made their final delivery. They say they're looking for someone to take their place, someone to join their convoy and drive with them forever." She shook her head. "I don't know if I believe all that. But I know that the drivers who come in here talking about those trucks, they all look exactly the way you look right now. Scared, tired, like they've been carrying something heavy for too long." I wanted to ask her more questions, wanted to know everything she'd heard about the Shadow Convoy and the drivers who'd encountered it. But before I could say anything, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a CB radio, the one behind the counter that the truck stop used to communicate with drivers on the lot. It crackled to life with a burst of static, and then a voice came through the speaker. The same flat, emotionless voice I'd heard on my own radio. "Lawton, time to go." Faye's face went pale. She looked at the radio, then at me, and I could see in her eyes that she understood now. She understood that whatever was happening to me was real, that the stories she'd been hearing weren't just tall tales and superstition. "You should get out of here," she said quietly. "Whatever that is, whatever it wants from you, I don't think you want to keep it waiting." I left money on the counter and walked back to my truck, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. The parking lot was quiet, the other trucks sitting dark and silent in their rows. I climbed into my cab and started the engine, and as I pulled out of the parking space, I saw them appear on the access road, 6 sets of headlights arranged in their perfect formation, waiting for me to return to the highway. I thought about not going. I thought about parking right there in the truck stop lot and waiting until morning, waiting until the sun came up and maybe whatever was out there would go away. But I knew it wouldn't work. I knew that the convoy would be there whether it was day or night, whether I was on the highway or sitting in a parking lot or locked in my house 1,000 miles away. It had found me, and it wasn't going to let me go. I pulled onto the highway and watched the headlights fall into formation behind me, maintaining their perfect spacing, their perfect speed. There were 6 of them now, but somehow I knew there would be more. Somehow I knew that the convoy was growing, adding trucks one by one, building towards something that I couldn't see and couldn't stop. I drove for another 3 hours that night, all the way to Tucson, and the convoy followed me the entire way. Sometimes there would be 6 trucks behind me, sometimes 7, sometimes 8. They came and went throughout the night, joining the formation and then dropping away, as if they were taking shifts or following some rotation I didn't understand. The CB crackled occasionally with that same message. Keep your lane, you're not alone. But otherwise the voice stayed silent. It had delivered its warning, and now it was just waiting, watching, following. I made my delivery the next morning and headed back to Vegas, taking a different route this time, staying on the main interstates where there was plenty of traffic and plenty of light. For 2 days, I didn't see the convoy. I started to hope that maybe it was tied to that one stretch of road, that Highway 93 corridor between Vegas and Arizona where I'd first encountered it. Maybe if I just avoided that area, stuck to other routes, I'd be okay. But on the third night, they found me again. I was on Interstate 15, halfway between Vegas and Los Angeles, surrounded by other vehicles and bathed in the glow of a million headlights and street lamps and highway signs. And there they were, sitting a quarter-mile back in my mirrors, arranged in their formation, completely invisible to everyone except me. The other drivers on the road passed them without a glance, without any indication that they could see the black trucks with no markers that were following me through the night. It was like the convoy existed on a different plane, a shadow version of the highway that only I could access. I called Marlowe that night from a truck stop outside Barstow. I'd finally gotten a signal on my phone, and I didn't care anymore how crazy I sounded. I needed to talk to someone, needed to know if anyone else had experienced what I was going through. Marlowe listened without interrupting while I told him everything. The headlights, the voice on the radio, the trucks that disappeared whenever I stopped moving. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. I thought maybe he'd hung up, or maybe he was trying to figure out how to tell me I'd lost my mind. But when he spoke again, his voice was quiet and serious, the way it gets when he's about to say something important. "Ruben, I've been driving these roads for 20 years, and I've heard stories about a lot of strange things. Ghost trucks, phantom hitchhikers, rest stops that don't exist anymore, all the usual stuff that gets passed around at truck stops and on the CB. Most of it's nonsense, just tales people tell to pass the time. But the convoy you're describing, the trucks with no markers that follow you but never pass, I've heard about that before, more than once. What do people say about it?" I asked, remembering what Faye had told me at the truck stop. "What is it supposed to be?" "Different people say different things. Some say it's ghosts, drivers who died on the road and can't move on. Some say it's a warning, a sign that something bad is going to happen if you don't change your ways. Some say it's the road itself, testing you, trying to figure out if you're worthy of being out there." He paused. "What do you think it is?" I thought about the question for a long time before I answered. "I think it's hungry," I said finally. "I think it wants something from me, and it's not going to stop until it gets it." "What does it want?" "I don't know, but I'm starting to think I might not have a choice about giving it to them." Marlowe was quiet for a moment. "Listen, Ruben, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to hear me out before you say anything. There's a man I know, a retired driver who lives out in Kingman. His name is Wheeler, and he used to run the same routes you do, back in the 80s and 90s. He had some experiences out there that he doesn't like to talk about, but I think he might know something about what you're going through. I think he might be able to help you." "What kind of experiences?" "The kind that made him quit driving. The kind that made him move out to the middle of nowhere and never get behind the wheel of a truck again." Marlowe gave me Wheeler's phone number and made me promise to call him. "And Ruben, be careful out there. Whatever that convoy is, whatever it wants, don't give it a reason to get any closer than it already is." I thanked him and hung up, and then I sat there in my cab for a long time, thinking about what he'd said. I thought about calling Wheeler right then, but something held me back. Maybe I wasn't ready to hear what he had to tell me. Maybe I was afraid that once I knew the truth, there'd be no going back. I finished my coffee and pulled back onto the highway, watching the mirrors as I merged into traffic. The convoy was still there, 7 trucks now, their headlights burning steady in the darkness behind me. I thought about Marlowe's words. Don't give it a reason to get any closer. And I wondered what would happen if it did get closer. If those trucks finally closed the gap and pulled up alongside me the way they had that first night on Highway 93. I wondered what I would see if I looked into those black windows again. What would be looking back at me from inside those cabs? Keep your lane. You're not alone. The message echoed in my head as I drove through the night, and for the first time, I thought I understood what it meant. It wasn't a warning or a threat, it was an invitation. The convoy wanted me to join them, wanted me to take my place in that formation and drive with them forever. And sooner or later, I was going to have to decide whether to accept. The highway stretched out before me like a river of darkness, and the headlights followed behind me, patient and eternal, waiting for my answer. I called Wheeler the next morning from a motel room in Barstow. I'd driven through the night with the convoy behind me, watching the number of trucks fluctuate between 7 and 9, never dropping below that threshold now. By the time I'd pulled off the highway and checked into the first place I could find, I was running on fumes, physically, mentally, emotionally. I'd barely slept in 3 days, and when I did manage to close my eyes, I dreamed about headlights, endless rows of them, stretching back into infinity, all of them following me down a road that never ended. Wheeler answered on the 4th ring. His voice was rough and wary, the voice of a man who didn't like talking to strangers. When I told him that Marlowe had given me his number, that I was having experiences on the road that I couldn't explain, he was quiet for a long time. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, and I had the feeling he was deciding whether to hang up or hear me out. "What kind of experiences?" he asked, finally. I told him everything, starting from the first night on Highway 93 and going all the way through to the previous evening. I told him about the trucks without markers, the voice on the radio, the way the convoy disappeared whenever I stopped moving and reappeared whenever I returned to the highway. I told him about Faye at the truck stop and what she'd said about ghost drivers looking for someone to take their place. I told him that I was scared, that I didn't know what was happening to me, and that I needed help from someone who understood. When I finished, Wheeler let out a long breath, like he'd been holding it the entire time I was talking. "How many trucks are following you now?" he asked. 9, sometimes more, sometimes less, but it hasn't dropped below 9 in the last 24 hours. "And the voice on the radio, what does it say?" "Keep your lane. You're not alone. That's it." Over and over. Wheeler was quiet again, and I could almost feel him thinking, working through something in his head. "You need to come see me," he said. "Not tomorrow, not next week. Today. Right now. Can you do that?" "I've got a load I'm supposed to pick up in Vegas this afternoon. Forget the load. Call your dispatcher and tell them you're sick. Tell them your truck broke down. Tell them whatever you need to tell them. But you need to get to Kingman as fast as you can. I'll text you my address. Don't stop for anything except fuel, and whatever you do, don't pull over after dark. You understand me?" I understood him. I didn't know what he was going to tell me, but I understood the urgency in his voice, and I understood that he believed what I was telling him. That was enough for now. I called my dispatcher and told him I had a family emergency, that I needed to take a few days off and couldn't make the Vegas pickup. He wasn't happy about it, but I'd been driving for the company for 8 years without missing a single load, so he cut me some slack. I grabbed my bag from the motel room and headed for my truck, squinting against the morning sun as I crossed the parking lot. The convoy was waiting for me on the highway. I saw them as soon as I merged onto the interstate. 9 sets of headlights, even in broad daylight, burning through the morning haze like stars that refused to set. I'd never seen them during the day before, and somehow that made it worse. It meant they weren't bound by the rules I'd assumed they followed, weren't limited to the darkness the way I'd hoped. They could find me anytime, anywhere. There was no hiding from them. I drove east on Interstate 40, pushing the speed limit as much as I dared, watching the convoy maintain its position in my mirrors. The desert rolled past on both sides, flat and brown and empty, dotted with the occasional gas station or cluster of buildings that passed for a town out here. I tried the CB a few times, calling out to other drivers, but the airwaves were dead. The silence was complete, broken only by the hum of my engine and the whisper of wind against the cab. Around noon, something changed. The voice came over the radio without warning, filling the cab with its flat, affectless tone. But this time, it wasn't just repeating the same message. This time, it was saying something new. "You're getting close now, Lawton. Close to the place where it started. Close to the place where it has to end." I grabbed the mic and keyed it. "What place? What are you talking about?" "The mile marker. The one that isn't there. The one that's been waiting for you since before you were born." The radio went silent, and I was left with the echo of those words bouncing around inside my skull. The mile marker that isn't there. I didn't know what it meant, but something about it felt familiar, like a half-remembered dream or a story someone had told me a long time ago. I pushed the thought aside and focused on the road, on getting to Kingman, on finding Wheeler and getting some answers. I pulled into Kingman around 2 in the afternoon and followed the GPS to Wheeler's address. He lived in a small house on the outskirts of town, a single-story place with a chain-link fence and a yard full of desert landscaping. There was an old pickup truck in the driveway, but no sign of a semi, no indication that the man who lived here had ever been a long-haul driver. I parked on the street and walked up to the front door, feeling the heat of the afternoon sun on my back. Wheeler answered before I could knock, like he'd been watching for me through the window. He was in his 60s, lean and weathered, with gray hair pulled back in a ponytail and eyes that looked like they'd seen things they wished they could forget. He studied me for a moment without speaking, then stepped aside and gestured for me to come in. The inside of the house was dim and cool, the blinds drawn against the afternoon glare. The walls were covered with photographs, desert landscapes mostly, but also a few pictures of trucks from what looked like the 80s and 90s, old Peterbilts and Kenworths with long hoods and chrome stacks, the kind of rigs that had mostly disappeared from the highways now. Wheeler led me to a small living room and pointed to a chair. "Sit down," he said. "You want some water? Coffee?" "Water's fine." He disappeared into the kitchen and came back with 2 glasses, handing one to me before settling into a chair across the room. He didn't say anything for a while, just sat there looking at me with those tired, knowing eyes. "How long since you slept?" he asked finally. 3 days? Maybe 4, I'm not sure anymore. You look like I did, back when it was happening to me." He took a drink of his water and set the glass down on the table beside him. "You want to know what it is, the thing that's following you. You want to know why it chose you and how to make it stop. Yes, I can tell you some of it. The rest, you're going to have to figure out for yourself, because everyone's experience is different. But I can tell you what happened to me, and maybe that'll help you understand what you're dealing with." Wheeler leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling, like he was searching for the right words. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more distant, like he was talking about something that had happened to someone else. "It started for me in 1987. I was running freight between Phoenix and Albuquerque, same routes I'd been driving for 10 years. Good runs, steady work, no problems. Then one night I started seeing the headlights. 3 of them at first, just like you described. They followed me for about 50 miles, then disappeared when I pulled off for fuel. I thought I'd imagined it, Thought maybe I was just tired and seeing things. But they came back the next night, and the night after that, and pretty soon they were there every time I got behind the wheel. How long did it last? I asked. 6 weeks. 6 weeks of driving with those lights behind me. 6 weeks of hearing that voice on the radio telling me to keep my lane. 6 weeks of not sleeping, not eating, not being able to think about anything except what was following me and what it wanted. He shook his head slowly. I thought I was losing my mind. I thought maybe I'd had some kind of breakdown and was hallucinating the whole thing. But then I started talking to other drivers, and I found out I wasn't the only one. There were others who'd seen the convoy, who'd heard the voice. Some of them had been dealing with it for months, even years, and some of them, he stopped, and I saw something dark pass across his face. Some of them what? Some of them didn't make it. They'd be driving along, convoy behind them like always, and then one day they'd just disappear. Their trucks would be found abandoned on the side of the road, engines still running, no sign of the driver anywhere. The police would investigate, but they never found anything. The drivers were just gone, like they'd evaporated into thin air. I felt something cold settle into my stomach. What happened to them? Where did they go? Wheeler looked at me for a long moment before answering. They joined the convoy. That's what I think anyway. I think the convoy takes people, adds them to its numbers. The trucks you see following you, they're not empty. There are drivers in those cabs, drivers who used to be just like you and me. They got too close, or they gave up, or they just ran out of strength to keep fighting. And now they're part of it, driving those roads forever, looking for the next person to take their place. I thought about Faye at the truck stop, what she'd said about ghost drivers searching for someone to join them. I thought about the trucks I'd seen behind me, the black windows that showed nothing inside. Were there really people in those cabs? People who'd been like me once, hauling freight and paying bills and living normal lives before the convoy found them and swallowed them up? How did you get away? I asked. You said it lasted 6 weeks. How did you make it stop? Wheeler stood up and walked to the window, pulling the blinds aside to look out at the street. There's a stretch of road out on Highway 93 south of here, where the convoy is strongest. It's where it all started, as far as I can tell, some kind of focal point, a place where the veil between our world and whatever's on the other side is thinner than it should be. When I was going through it, I kept getting drawn to that spot, like something was pulling me there. I'd be driving a completely different route, and somehow I'd end up on 93, heading south toward that mile marker. The mile marker that isn't there, I said, remembering what the voice had told me on the radio. Wheeler turned to look at me, and there was surprise in his eyes. It said that to you, those exact words? This morning. It said I was getting close to the place where it started, close to the place where it has to end. It said the mile marker has been waiting for me since before I was born. Wheeler was quiet for a moment, processing what I'd told him. Then it's further along than I thought. It's almost ready to make its move. What move? What's it going to do? I don't know exactly. I never let it get that far with me, but I know that the mile marker is the key. It's where people disappear, where the convoy claims them. There's a spot on 93, about 40 miles south of Kingman, where there should be a marker, but there isn't. Mile 47. Every other marker is there, 46 and 48 and all the rest. But 47 is missing. It's been missing since before anyone can remember, and no one knows why. That's where the convoy is strongest. That's where it took most of the people who've disappeared. So what do I do? Stay away from that stretch of road? Wheeler shook his head. You can't stay away from it. I told you it draws you in. No matter what route you try to take, you'll end up there eventually. The convoy will make sure of it. He sat back down and leaned forward, looking at me intently. The only way to stop it is to face it. You have to go to the mile marker, to the place where 47 should be, and you have to confront whatever's waiting for you there. That's what I did, and that's how I got free. What happened when you went there? What did you find? I found the convoy. All of it, every truck that had ever been part of it, lined up on the highway waiting for me. They were just sitting there, engines idling, headlights on, blocking the road in both directions. And in front of them, right where mile marker 47 should have been, there was... He stopped, and I saw him shudder. There was something else. Something that wasn't a truck, and wasn't a person, and wasn't anything I'd ever seen before. It was like a hole in the world, a dark spot that swallowed up the light around it, and it was watching me, waiting for me to come closer. What did you do? I drove toward it. I put my foot on the gas and I drove straight at that thing because I didn't know what else to do. And when I got close to it, when I was almost on top of it, he spread his hands. It disappeared, all of it, the trucks, the darkness, everything. 1 second they were there, and the next second the road was empty. I was alone on the highway with nothing behind me and nothing in front of me except the desert and the sky. I pulled over and got out of my cab and stood there for an hour, waiting for them to come back. They never did. The convoy was gone, and it never followed me again. I sat with that for a while, trying to understand what he was telling me. So you're saying I need to go to mile marker 47 and drive toward whatever's waiting there? That's how I make it stop? That's how I made it stop. Whether it'll work for you, I don't know. Like I said, everyone's experience is different. Wheeler stood up again, and I could see that the conversation was draining him, bringing back memories he'd spent years trying to forget. But I know one thing for sure. You can't keep running from it. The more you run, the stronger it gets. The more trucks it adds, the closer it gets to taking you. If you don't face it soon, you won't get another chance. I stayed at Wheeler's house for another hour, asking questions and trying to prepare myself for what I had to do. He told me everything he could remember about his experience at mile marker 47, the way the convoy had arranged itself, the feeling of wrongness that had filled the air, the moment when he'd made the decision to drive toward the darkness instead of away from it. He told me that he'd never understood exactly what the convoy was or where it came from, but he believed it was something old, something that had been using that stretch of highway long before there were trucks or cars or roads of any kind. It was a predator, he said. A hunter that used the isolation and the darkness and the endless repetition of the road to wear down its prey until they were too weak to resist. By the time I left his house, the sun was starting to go down. Wheeler walked me to my truck and stood there while I climbed into the cab. "You don't have to do this tonight," he said. "You could wait until morning, get some rest, face it when you're stronger." "I can't rest, not anymore. And if I wait, it'll just get worse." I started the engine and looked at him through the open window. "Thank you for talking to me, for telling me what you know. Be careful out there, Lawton. The convoy's been building toward this for a long time. It's not going to let you go without a fight." I pulled away from Wheeler's house and headed south on Highway 93, watching the sky turn orange and pink ahead of me as the sun dropped towards the mountains. The road was quiet, almost empty, just a few cars going the opposite direction, and the occasional truck passing me on its way north. I kept checking my mirrors, waiting for the headlights to appear, but for the first 20 miles there was nothing behind me except the fading light. Then, as I passed mile marker 52, they came. Not 9 trucks this time. Not 12 or 15 or any number I could count. The entire road behind me filled with headlights, a river of them stretching back as far as I could see. More trucks than I'd ever seen in one place in my entire life. There had to be 50 of them, maybe 100, all running without markers, all maintaining their perfect formation. The convoy had called in every vehicle it had, every driver it had ever claimed, and they were all behind me now, following me toward the mile marker 47. The voice came over the radio, but it was different this time. It wasn't flat and emotionless anymore. It sounded eager, hungry, like something that had been waiting a long time and was finally about to get what it wanted. Almost there now, Lawton. Almost home. Keep your lane. You're not alone. You'll never be alone again. I gripped the wheel and pressed down on the accelerator, watching the mile markers count down in my headlights. 51, 50, 49, 48. The convoy surged behind me, the headlights getting brighter, the trucks getting closer. They were breaking formation now, spreading across both lanes, filling the entire highway with their presence. They weren't just following me anymore, they were herding me. And then I saw it, a gap in the markers where 47 should have been. A stretch of empty roadside with no post, no sign, no indication that anything had ever been there. But there was something in that gap, something that my headlights couldn't quite illuminate. A darkness that seemed to absorb the light and pull it down into itself. It was exactly what Wheeler had described. A hole in the world. A hungry void that had been waiting for me since before I was born. The convoy roared behind me, the sound of 100 engines filling the night, and I drove straight toward the darkness. The darkness swallowed my headlights. I don't know how else to describe it. One moment I was driving toward mile marker 47, my high beams cutting through the desert night, and the next moment the light just stopped. It didn't fade or dim. It ended, like someone had drawn a line across the road and said, "Nothing gets past here." I was still moving, still pressing the accelerator, still gripping the wheel, but I couldn't see anything in front of me. Not the road, not the desert, not even the hood of my own truck. Just blackness, absolute and complete, darker than anything I'd ever experienced. The convoy roared behind me. I could hear them, feel them, sense the mass of all those trucks pushing against the air at my back. Their headlights should have been filling my mirrors with light, but when I looked, the mirrors showed nothing. The same darkness that had swallowed my headlights had taken theirs too. We were all driving blind now, hurtling through a void that had no shape and no end. I don't know how long it lasted. Time didn't seem to work right in that darkness. It could have been seconds or hours. I couldn't tell the difference. I just kept my foot on the gas and my hands on the wheel, driving forward because there was nothing else to do. Because stopping felt like surrender, and I wasn't ready to give up yet. Then, without warning, the darkness ended. I came out of it like breaking through the surface of deep water, gasping and blinking against the sudden return of light. My headlights were working again, illuminating the road ahead of me. The same empty two-lane highway I'd been driving before. The same desert scrub and distant mountains. The same sky full of stars. I checked my mirrors and saw the convoy behind me. All those trucks still in formation, their headlights burning steady in the night. But something was different. The mile markers were wrong. I'd been at 47 when I entered the darkness, or where 47 should have been, but now the marker ahead of me said 52. I'd gone backward somehow, traveled 5 miles in the wrong direction while I was inside that void. I looked at my odometer and saw that it had rolled forward, not back. The truck thought I'd traveled the distance, even though the road said otherwise. It was like the highway itself had shifted around me, rearranged itself while I wasn't looking. I kept driving, watching the markers count down again. 51, 50, 49, 48, and then nothing. The same empty stretch of roadside where 47 should have been. The same gap in the sequence. But this time there was no darkness waiting for me. No hole in the world. Just the road, stretching out ahead of me like it always had. The convoy was still behind me. I pulled over to the shoulder and stopped the truck, setting the brake and killing the engine. I needed a moment to think, to figure out what had happened and what I was supposed to do next. Wheeler had said the darkness would disappear when he drove toward it, that the convoy would vanish and leave him alone. But that hadn't happened to me. I'd gone through the darkness and come out the other side, and nothing had changed. The trucks were still there, still waiting, still watching. I sat in the cab for a long time, staring at the headlights in my mirrors. They weren't moving, weren't getting closer or falling back. They were just there, 100 points of light arranged in their perfect formation, patient and eternal. I thought about what Wheeler had told me, about the drivers who'd disappeared at mile marker 47, the ones who'd joined the convoy and were still out there driving the roads forever. I wondered if that was what was happening to me, if I'd already crossed some threshold without realizing it and was now trapped in the same loop they were. That's when the CB crackled to life. You made it through, Lawton. Not many do. Not many have the strength to keep driving when the darkness comes. I grabbed the mic, my hands shaking. What do you want from me? Why won't you leave me alone? We don't want anything from you. We're not trying to take you. We're trying to show you. Show me what? The voice was silent for a moment, and when it came back it sounded different. Not flat and mechanical anymore, but almost sad, almost human. The road doesn't end, Lawton. It never ends. You drive and you think you're getting somewhere, but you're not. You're just going in circles, the same routes over and over, the same miles, the same darkness. That's what we are. That's what we're trying to show you. The convoy isn't a threat. It's a mirror. I didn't understand what the voice was telling me, didn't know what it meant about mirrors and circles and roads that never end. But something about the words resonated in a place I couldn't quite identify. A deep and uncomfortable recognition that I didn't want to examine too closely. I'm not like you, I said into the mic. I'm not dead. I'm not a ghost. I'm just a driver trying to do my job and go home to my family. We were all just drivers once. We all had jobs and families and lives we thought were real. But the road took us. The way it takes everyone eventually. The road is patient. It can wait forever. And sooner or later, everyone runs out of miles. The radio went silent, and this time it stayed silent. I sat there in the dark cab, listening to the wind outside and the tick of the engine cooling down, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. The convoy is a mirror. The road never ends. Everyone runs out of miles. It sounded like nonsense, like the ramblings of something that had lost its mind after too long in the darkness. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was truth in it somewhere, a meaning I was supposed to understand, but couldn't quite grasp. I started the engine and pulled back onto the highway, heading north toward Kingman. I didn't know what else to do, where else to go. I couldn't keep driving in circles all night, and I couldn't face the mile marker again. Not yet. Not until I'd had time to think about what had happened and what the voice had said. I needed to get off the road, find a place to sleep, give my mind a chance to process everything I'd experienced. The convoy followed me, but it kept its distance. The trucks stayed about a half-mile back now, further than they'd ever been before. Their headlights just a faint glow in my mirrors. They weren't pressing anymore, weren't trying to close the gap or herd me toward anything. They were just there, watching, waiting. Like they'd delivered their message and were curious to see what I'd do with it. I made it to Kingman around midnight and checked into the same motel where I'd stayed before. I parked my truck in the lot and walked to my room without looking back at the highway, without checking to see if the headlights were still there. I knew they were. I could feel them, the way you feel someone watching you from across a room. They'd be there in the morning, and the morning after that, and every morning for the rest of my life. That was what the voice had been trying to tell me. The convoy wasn't going to take me, wasn't going to make me disappear like all those other drivers. It was just going to follow me forever. A reminder of something I was supposed to learn but hadn't learned yet. I lay down on the bed without undressing and stared at the ceiling, too tired to sleep and too wired to relax. My mind kept going over what had happened at mile marker 47, trying to find an explanation that made sense. Wheeler had driven toward the darkness, and it had disappeared. I'd driven toward the darkness and gone through it, come out the other side with nothing changed. What was the difference? What had he done that I hadn't? I thought about his story, about the way he'd described making the decision to face the convoy instead of running from it. He'd said he drove toward the thing because he didn't know what else to do, because he was out of options and had to try something. But maybe that wasn't quite true. Maybe he'd made a different choice than I had, a choice that had set him free while I was still trapped. I'd driven toward the darkness, but I hadn't accepted it. I'd gone through it with my foot on the gas and my hands on the wheel, fighting the whole way, refusing to let go of control even for a second. I'd treated it like an obstacle to overcome, a problem to solve, something to push through and leave behind. But what if that wasn't what the convoy wanted? What if the darkness wasn't a test of strength or courage, but something else entirely? The convoy is a mirror. The road never ends. I thought about my life on the road, the 23 years I'd spent hauling freight from one place to another. I thought about all the miles I'd driven, all the nights I'd spent alone in my cab, all the time I'd missed with my family because I was always gone, always chasing the next load. I thought about the way the routes blurred together after a while, how one highway looked pretty much like every other highway, how the truck stops and rest areas and way stations all seemed to merge into a single, endless loop of diesel and coffee and hours behind the wheel. Was that what the convoy was showing me? The futility of it all, the sameness, the way I'd been driving in circles my whole career without ever getting anywhere? The road never ends. Maybe that was the point. Maybe the convoy wasn't a supernatural threat or a ghostly phenomenon. Maybe it was just a reflection of what I'd already become, a man who'd given so much of himself to the road that there was nothing left but the driving. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there until the sun came up, turning it over in my mind, trying to decide what to do. I could call my dispatcher and tell him I was ready to work, get back on the road and pretend none of this had happened. I could keep driving with the convoy behind me, learn to live with those headlights in my mirrors the way you learn to live with any chronic condition. Plenty of drivers had done it, according to Wheeler. Plenty of drivers had made their peace with the trucks that followed them and gone on with their lives. But I kept thinking about the voice on the radio, the way it had sounded almost sad when it told me what the convoy really was. We were all just drivers once. We all had jobs and families and lives we thought were real. The drivers in that convoy, they hadn't been taken against their will. They'd made a choice, the same choice I'd been making every day for 23 years. They'd chosen the road over everything else, and eventually the road had become everything they were. I checked out of the motel and drove to Wheeler's house. He was outside working in his yard when I pulled up, and he straightened up and watched me get out of the cab with an expression I couldn't read. "You made it," he said. "I wasn't sure you would." I went through the darkness. I came out the other side, but the convoy's still there. Wheeler nodded slowly, like he'd expected that. "It didn't let you go." "No, but it talked to me. It said things." I stopped, not sure how to explain. It said the convoy was a mirror, that the road never ends, that everyone runs out of miles eventually. Wheeler was quiet for a long moment. looking at me with those tired eyes. What do you think it meant? I think it meant I have a choice to make. I think it's showing me what I'll become if I keep living the way I've been living. And I think I took a breath. I think the only way to make it stop is to stop myself. To get off the road before the road becomes all I am. Wheeler didn't say anything to that. He just stood there in his yard, this man who'd walked away from trucking 30 years ago and never looked back, and I could see in his face that he understood. He'd made the same choice once. He'd seen the same mirror. I drove back to Vegas that afternoon and turned in my resignation to the company. I told my dispatcher I was done, that I was getting out of trucking and finding something else to do with my life. He tried to talk me out of it, told me I was one of the best drivers they had, offered me better routes and more money. But I'd made up my mind. I was done driving in circles. I was done watching the miles pile up while my life slipped away in the rear-view mirror. My wife cried when I told her. She'd been asking me to quit for years, to find a job that would keep me home more, let me be a father to our kids instead of a voice on the phone. She thought she'd never see the day, and I guess I thought so too. But something had changed out there on Highway 93. Something I couldn't fully explain, but couldn't ignore either. The convoy had shown me who I was becoming, and I didn't want to become that. I didn't want to end up like those drivers, following the same roads forever, never getting anywhere, never breaking free. It's been 6 months since I quit trucking. I work at a warehouse now, loading and unloading freight instead of hauling it across the country. The hours are regular, the pay is decent, and I'm home every night for dinner with my family. It's a different life than the one I had before, smaller in some ways, but it feels more real. It feels like I'm actually living it instead of just passing through. The convoy still follows me sometimes. Not every day, not even every week, but sometimes, when I'm driving home from work at night, or taking the family somewhere on the weekend, I'll look in my rearview mirror and see the headlights. They're distant now, further back than they used to be, and there are fewer of them. Sometimes just 2 or 3, sometimes only 1. They keep their distance and they don't try to get closer. They just watch, the way they always watched, waiting to see if I'll change my mind and come back to the road. I don't know if they'll ever go away completely. I don't know if you can ever really escape something like that once it's found you. But I think as long as I stay off the long hauls, as long as I keep choosing my family over the miles, the convoy will keep fading. One day I'll look in the mirror and there won't be anything there. Just the road behind me and the life ahead of me. Finally free of the thing I almost became. Wheeler told me the convoy was hungry, that it was a predator looking for prey. But I don't think that's quite right anymore. I think the convoy is a warning, a glimpse of where the road leads if you follow it too long. It shows you the emptiness at the end, the place where the miles run out and there's nothing left but the driving. Some people see that and they can't look away. They keep going, keep chasing until they become part of the convoy themselves. But some people see it and they wake up. They turn around and go home and find something else to live for. The road doesn't care either way. It just keeps going, the same as it always has, waiting for the next driver to come along. I still think about Highway 93 sometimes, about that gap in the mile markers where 47 should be. I think about the darkness I drove through, and the voice that spoke to me from the other side. I think about all those headlights stretched out behind me, all those drivers who made a different choice than I did. And sometimes, late at night when my family is asleep and the house is quiet, I stand at the window and look out at the street. The pavement is empty, the neighborhood is still, and there's nothing out there except the glow of street lamps and the shadows of parked cars. But every now and then, just at the edge of where the light fades into darkness, I think I see them. Headlights. Distant. Patient. Waiting. Keep your lane. they seem to say. You're not alone. And I turn away from the window and go back to bed. And I hold my wife a little closer and I remind myself that I made my choice. I got off the road. I came home. But the convoy is still out there. And somewhere on Highway 93, between mile markers 46 and 48, there's a place where the road remembers everyone who ever drove it and waits for them to come back. I hope I never see it again. But sometimes when the night is quiet and the darkness is deep, I'm not sure I ever really left. There's a stretch of Interstate 10 between El Paso and Tucson that most drivers try to avoid after dark. It's not the terrain that bothers them. The road is flat and straight, easy driving even for a rookie. It's not the weather, which is usually clear and dry, or the traffic, which thins out to almost nothing once you get past the last truck stops on either end. It's something else, something harder to put into words. The drivers who've spent enough time on that highway know what I'm talking about. There's a feeling out there, a presence that settles into your cab when the sun goes down and doesn't leave until you see the lights of civilization again. I've heard it called different things over the years. The emptiness, the wait, the watcher. I just call it the road, because that's what it is. The road, and whatever lives in it. My name is Gideon Rames, and I've been hauling freight across the Southwest for 19 years. In all that time, I've driven that stretch of I-10 more times than I can count, and I've felt the presence out there more times than I want to remember. But I never let it stop me, never let it change my routes or my schedule. I'm a professional, and professionals don't get spooked by feelings. At least, that's what I told myself until the night I lost my mile markers and found something waiting for me in the space where they should have been. It started on a Wednesday evening in late September. I was running a load of machine parts from a manufacturing plant in Houston to a distributor in Phoenix, a route I'd driven so many times I could practically do it in my sleep. The pickup had gone smoothly, the load was secured properly, and I was making good time as I crossed into New Mexico with the sun setting behind me. I figured I'd push through to Tucson that night, grab a few hours of sleep at a truck stop I knew, and make my delivery first thing in the morning. It was a solid plan, the kind of plan I'd executed 100 times before. But the road had other ideas. The first thing I noticed was the silence on the CB. I always keep the radio on when I'm driving, tuned to Channel 19 to catch the chatter from other drivers about traffic and road conditions. It's part of the rhythm of long-haul trucking, that constant murmur of voices keeping you company through the empty miles. But as I passed through Las Cruces and headed west toward Deming, the chatter started to fade. By the time I hit the Arizona border, it was gone completely. Just static, low and constant, like the sound of wind blowing through an empty room. I tried a few different channels, thinking maybe there was interference or a dead zone I'd forgotten about, but every frequency was the same, that same flat, featureless static, with no voices breaking through. I'd driven this route dozens of times, and I'd never experienced anything like it. There were always other trucks on this highway, always someone to talk to or at least listen to. The silence felt wrong, unnatural, like the road had swallowed up everyone except me. I checked my phone and found that I had signal, which was reassuring. At least I wasn't completely cut off from the world. I thought about calling my dispatcher to report the radio trouble, but I didn't want to sound paranoid over a little static. Radios malfunction sometimes, especially out here where the distances are long and the terrain plays tricks with the signals. I told myself it would clear up once I got further down the road, and I focused on driving. The sun finished setting around 7:30, and the desert turned from orange to purple to black in the space of 20 minutes. I switched on my headlights and settled into the rhythm of night driving, the steady hum of the engine, the glow of the dashboard instruments. the white lines scrolling past in the cone of light ahead of me. There's a kind of meditation to it, a trance state that takes over when you've been on the road long enough. Your hands know what to do, your eyes know where to look, and your mind drifts into a space that's not quite awake and not quite asleep. Some drivers fight against it, pump themselves full of caffeine and loud music to stay alert. I've learned to embrace it, to let the road carry me along while I watch from somewhere deep inside my own head. That's probably why I didn't notice the mile markers right away. I was about an hour past the Arizona border, deep into the empty stretch between Lordsburg and Wilcox, when something tugged at the edge of my attention. I couldn't identify it at first, just a vague sense that something was off, that the rhythm of the drive had been disrupted somehow. I blinked and straightened up in my seat, trying to focus, and that's when I realized what was wrong. I'd been driving for over an hour without seeing a single mile marker. That doesn't happen on interstate highways. The markers are everywhere, every mile or less, green signs with white numbers telling you exactly where you are and how far you have to go. They're such a constant presence that you stop noticing them after a while, the way you stop noticing your own heartbeat. But when they're gone, you feel it. You feel the absence like a missing tooth, a gap in the landscape that shouldn't be there. I started paying attention, watching for the next marker to appear in my headlights. A minute passed, then 2, then 5. Nothing. Just the empty road and the desert and the darkness pressing in on all sides. I checked my speedometer. I was doing 70, which meant I should have passed at least 5 or 6 markers since I started looking. But there was nothing. No signs at all, like someone had come along and removed them from the roadside. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the GPS, thinking maybe I'd missed a turn somehow and ended up on a different road. But the map showed me exactly where I expected to be. A blue dot moving west on I-10 toward Tucson. According to the GPS, the next mile marker should be coming up in less than half a mile. I watched the distance count down on the screen. 0.4 miles, 0.3, 0.2, 0.1, and then the marker should have appeared. It didn't. The GPS showed me passing the marker, showed my position moving beyond it, and continuing down the highway. But there was nothing on the roadside, no sign, no post, no indication that anything had ever been there. I slowed down and looked in my mirrors, thinking maybe I'd missed it somehow, but the road behind me was as empty as the road ahead. The mile marker existed on the map, but it didn't exist in the real world. It was there and not there at the same time. I pulled over to the shoulder and stopped the truck, leaving the engine running while I tried to figure out what was happening. I'd been driving this route for almost 2 decades, and I knew it as well as I knew my own name. The mile markers were always there, every single one of them, posted on the right side of the road at regular intervals from the New Mexico border all the way to Phoenix. They didn't just disappear. They didn't just stop existing. I got out of the cab and walked along the shoulder, shining my flashlight at the place where the marker should have been. There was nothing. No post, no hole where a post had been removed, no indication that anything had ever stood there. Just dirt and scrub, and the endless desert stretching away into the darkness. I walked 100 yards in each direction, checking both sides of the road, but I didn't find anything. The mile marker was gone, and as far as I could tell, it had never been there in the first place. I was standing on the shoulder, trying to make sense of it, when I heard the sound. It came from the darkness to the south, a low rumble that I recognized immediately as a truck engine. I felt a surge of relief. Another driver, someone I could flag down and ask about the missing markers, someone who could confirm that I wasn't losing my mind. I turned toward the sound and waited for the headlights to appear. They didn't. The engine sound got louder, closer, and I could tell from the pitch and the rhythm that it was a big rig, probably a Peterbilt or a Kenworth. But there were no headlights, no marker lights, no glow of any kind against the desert sky. Just the sound, growing and growing until it seemed like the truck should be right on top of me, and then it passed me. I felt it more than I saw it. A rush of displaced air, a shadow moving through the darkness, the rumble of the engine dopplering as it went by. The truck was there, on the highway, passing my parked rig at 70 miles an hour. But it was completely dark. No lights of any kind, not even a reflection from my flashlight beam. It was like a hole in the night, a negative space where a truck should have been. And then it was gone, the engine sound fading into the distance ahead of me, and I was alone on the shoulder with my heart pounding and my hands shaking and no idea what I'd just witnessed. I got back in my cab and locked the doors, which is something I almost never do when I'm parked on the highway. I sat there for a long time, staring out the windshield at the empty road, trying to convince myself that I'd imagined the whole thing. A truck with no lights, that was impossible. It was illegal, for one thing, and suicidal for another. No one drives a big rig through the desert at night without lights. No one would even try. But I'd heard it. I'd felt it pass me. And somewhere out there in the darkness ahead, it was still driving, still moving west toward Tucson or Phoenix or wherever it was going. A ghost truck on a ghost highway following a route that didn't show up on any map. I thought about Clint Yarborough. I hadn't thought about Clint in years, hadn't let myself think about him. He'd been my partner back in the early days, when I was just starting out and didn't know enough to drive solo. We'd run as a team for almost 3 years, splitting the driving and the sleeping, sharing the cab and the miles and the long empty hours between loads. Clint had taught me most of what I knew about trucking, how to read the road, how to manage my logs, how to stay sane when the loneliness started to close in. He'd been a good partner and a better friend, and then one night he'd disappeared. It happened on this same stretch of highway almost 15 years ago. We were running a load from San Antonio to Los Angeles, and Clint was driving the night shift while I slept in the back. I woke up around 3 in the morning because the truck had stopped, and when I climbed into the front seat, Clint wasn't there. The cab was empty, the engine was idling, and the door on the driver's side was hanging open. I searched the whole truck, searched the roadside, called his name until my throat was raw. He was just gone, vanished into the desert night without a trace. The police investigated, of course. They searched the area, interviewed me for hours, checked Clint's background for any reason he might have wanted to disappear. But they never found anything, never came up with any explanation for what had happened. Clint Yarborough was declared a missing person, and eventually the case went cold. I finished the delivery on my own and kept driving, because that's what truckers do. You keep moving, you keep working. You don't let the road beat you no matter what it takes from you. But I never forgot Clint, and I never stopped wondering what had happened to him that night. Now, sitting in my cab on the shoulder of I-10 with the mile markers missing and a dark truck passing by without lights, I felt like I was starting to understand. Something had taken Clint. Something that lived out here in the empty miles. Something that existed in the spaces between the markers and the gaps in the radio static. It had taken him 15 years ago, and now it was showing itself to me. I started the engine and pulled back onto the highway because staying parked on the shoulder felt too exposed, too vulnerable. I needed to keep moving. Needed to get to Tucson where there were lights and people and some semblance of normal life. I pressed down on the accelerator and watched the speedometer climb, pushing the truck harder than I usually did on this stretch of road. That's when the CB crackled to life. I hadn't touched the radio since I'd given up on finding a working channel, but suddenly there was a voice coming through the static, faint, broken, but unmistakably human. "Marker, can't find anyone copy." I grabbed the mic and keyed it immediately. "This is Rames, westbound on I-10 past Wilcox. I copy you. What's your situation?" The static swelled for a moment, and then the voice came back, clearer this time. It was a woman's voice, and there was an edge of fear in it that made my stomach clench. "This is Hazel 12, also westbound on I-10. I've lost my mile markers. I've been driving for I don't know how long, and I can't find any markers. Can anyone tell me where I am? Can anyone help me?" I felt the hair stand up on the back of my neck. Hazel 12 was experiencing the same thing I was, the same impossible disappearance of every sign and marker on the highway. That meant it wasn't just me, wasn't just a hallucination or a mental break from too many hours behind the wheel. Something was happening out here, something real, something that was affecting more than one driver. "Hazel 12, this is Rames. I've lost my markers too. I don't know what's going on, but you're not alone out here. Can you give me your approximate location?" The static crackled and hissed, and for a moment I thought I'd lost her. Then her voice came back, but it was different now. Fainter, more distant, like she was drifting away from me even though we were on the same highway. "I don't know where I am. The GPS says I should be near Tucson, but I can't find any exits. I can't find any signs. I've been driving for hours and I'm not getting anywhere. I think..." The static surged, swallowing her words. "I think I'm stuck. I think the road is keeping me here." "Hazel 12, listen to me. Keep driving, keep moving west. We'll figure this out together. Just stay on the radio and talk to me." But she was gone. The static closed in like a curtain, and no matter how many times I called her handle, she didn't respond. I was alone again, driving through the darkness on a highway with no markers, and somewhere out there another driver was lost in the same void I was, unable to find her way out. I drove for another hour, watching for markers that never came, listening for Hazel 12's voice on the radio. The highway stretched out ahead of me, endless and unchanging, and I began to understand what she'd meant about being stuck. I was moving, the engine was running, the wheels were turning, but it felt like I wasn't getting anywhere. Like the road was a treadmill, scrolling under my tires while I stayed in the same place, trapped in a loop that had no beginning and no end. And somewhere behind me, growing slowly louder, I heard the rumble of a truck engine. Coming closer, running without lights, following the same road I was on, following me. The truck behind me stayed just out of sight for the next 30 miles. I could hear it back there, that low rumble of a diesel engine running at highway speed, but every time I checked my mirrors there was nothing. No headlights, no silhouette, no indication that anything was following me except the sound. It was like being stalked by something that existed only as noise. A predator made of vibration and exhaust, and the growl of a motor that never got tired. I tried to focus on the road ahead, on getting to Tucson and finding other people and putting this nightmare behind me. But it was hard to concentrate with that sound filling the cab. Hard to think about anything except what was back there and what it wanted from me. I kept my speed up, kept my hand steady on the wheel, and I watched the odometer roll forward while the mile markers stayed invisible and the highway stretched on without end. Somewhere around what should have been mile 280, I saw something in my headlights that made my breath stop. A mile marker. It was standing on the right side of the road exactly where it should have been. A green sign with white numbers glowing in the beam of my headlights. I felt a surge of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy. The markers were back. Whatever had been happening was over, and I was going to make it to Tucson after all. I leaned forward to read the number as I passed, already calculating how much further I had to go. The marker said 247. I stared at it as it flashed by, not understanding. Mile 247 was behind me, I'd passed it over an hour ago, back when the markers were still visible and the world still made sense. There was no way I could be seeing it again now, not unless I'd somehow turned around without realizing it and driven back the way I came. But I hadn't turned around. I'd been going west the whole time, following the same straight highway toward the same destination. The marker was wrong. It had to be wrong. I checked my GPS and felt my stomach drop. According to the map, I was at mile 283. I'd traveled 36 miles since the markers disappeared, which meant I should be seeing 283 or 284 on the roadside, not 247. The GPS and the marker didn't match. One of them was lying to me, and I didn't know which one. I kept driving, watching for more markers. They started appearing again after that, one after another, spaced out at the regular intervals I was used to. But the numbers were all wrong. 246. 245. 244. I was going backward, losing ground instead of gaining it, moving further from Tucson with every mile I drove. And the GPS kept insisting I was moving forward, kept showing my position creeping west across the map like nothing was wrong. The CB crackled, and Hazel 12's voice came through the static. "Rames, are you still out there?" I grabbed the mic, grateful to hear another human voice. "I'm here, Hazel 12. I'm still on the highway. Where are you?" "I don't know. The markers came back, but they're..." Her voice broke up for a moment, lost in the static. "They're going the wrong way. They're counting down instead of up. I've been driving west for 2 hours, and I'm further from Tucson than when I started." Same thing's happening to me. The GPS says I'm at mile 283, but the markers say 244. It's like the road is looping back on itself. What do we do? How do we get out of this? I didn't have an answer for her. I didn't know what we were caught in or how to escape it. All I knew was that stopping felt dangerous, that as long as we kept moving, there was at least a chance of finding our way out. "Just keep driving," I told her. "Stay on the radio. Stay on the highway. We'll figure this out." "There's something behind me," she said, and I heard the fear in her voice sharpen into something closer to panic. "I can hear it, a truck running without lights. It's been following me for the last hour, and it's getting closer." The same thing that was following me. The same dark truck, the same rumble of an engine, the same invisible presence that stayed just out of sight. We were both being hunted by something out here in the empty miles, something that had taken the markers and turned the road into a trap. "I hear it too," I said. "It's behind me, same as you. Don't stop, don't slow down. Just keep moving and stay on the radio." "I'm scared, Rames. I don't know what's happening, and I'm scared." "I know, I am too, but we're going to get through this. We just have to..." The static surged and her voice disappeared, cut off in mid-sentence like someone had pulled the plug. I called her handle again and again, but there was no response. The radio was dead. The highway was empty, and I was alone with the sound of that engine behind me and the mile markers counting down towards something I didn't want to reach. I thought about Clint again, about the night he'd vanished from this same stretch of road. I'd always assumed he'd wandered off somehow, gotten disoriented in the dark and walked away from the truck without realizing what he was doing. That's what the police had theorized anyway, that he'd experienced some kind of fugue state or mental break and simply walked into the desert until he couldn't walk anymore. But now, I wasn't so sure. Now I thought maybe the road had taken him the same way it was trying to take me, had swallowed him up into whatever void existed in the spaces between the mile markers. I wondered if he was still out here somewhere. Driving in the dark without lights, following the highway that never ended, waiting for someone else to join him. The engine sound behind me was getting louder. I checked my mirrors, and this time I saw something. Not headlights, not a shape, but a darkness. A patch of black that was somehow darker than the rest of the night, moving against the stars like a hole cut out of the sky. It was back there, maybe a quarter-mile behind me, and it was closing the gap. I pushed the accelerator down and felt the truck surge forward, the engine climbing toward redline as I tried to put distance between me and whatever was following me. The speedometer hit 80, then 85, then 90, way too fast for a loaded truck on a desert highway at night. I didn't care. I'd rather risk a blowout or a rollover than let that thing catch up to me. I'd rather crash than become whatever Clint had become. The mile markers kept counting down. 238, 237, 236. I was losing ground faster than I was gaining it. The numbers dropping even as my speed climbed higher. It was like the road was stretching out behind me, adding miles to the distance I'd already covered, while ahead of me everything compressed down to nothing. I was on a treadmill running as fast as I could and getting nowhere, and sooner or later I was going to run out of fuel or energy or luck. The CB came back to life, but it wasn't Hazel 12's voice this time. It was a man's voice, one I recognized even after 15 years, one I'd hoped I would never hear again. Gideon. I almost drove off the road. My hands jerked on the wheel and the truck swerved toward the shoulder before I caught it and straightened out. My heart hammering in my chest and my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "Gideon, can you hear me?" It was Clint. It was Clint Yarborough's voice coming through my radio like he was sitting in the truck right next to me, instead of dead and gone these 15 years. I grabbed the mic with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking and keyed it without knowing what I was going to say. "Clint, is that you?" "It's me, Gideon. I've been waiting for you. I've been out here waiting for so long. Where are you? What happened to you?" "I'm on the road. I've always been on the road. That's what happens when it takes you. You become part of it, part of the highway, part of the miles. You drive forever and you never get anywhere, and you wait for someone to come along who can hear you. Someone who remembers." I didn't want to believe what he was telling me. I wanted to believe it was a trick, a hallucination, something the road was using to mess with my head and break down my resistance. But it was Clint's voice, Clint's cadence, the same way of talking I remembered from all those nights we'd spent in the cab together, sharing stories and jokes and the quiet companionship that comes from driving the same miles with the same person year after year. "I looked for you," I said. "That night, when you disappeared, I searched everywhere. I called your name until I couldn't talk anymore. Why didn't you answer me?" I couldn't. I was already gone by then, already part of the road. I tried to reach you, tried to let you know what had happened, but you couldn't hear me. No one could hear me until you came back here, until you drove into the place where the markers disappear. That's where we are, Gideon. That's where all of us are, everyone who's been taken. The place between the miles. The darkness in my mirror was closer now. I could see it taking shape, resolving into the outline of a truck. A cab, a trailer, all of it black and lightless, running me down like a predator closing in for the kill. I pushed the accelerator harder, but there was nowhere left to go. The engine was already maxed out, the truck was already shaking with the effort of maintaining this speed, and the thing behind me was still gaining. "Is that you back there?" I asked. "Is that your truck?" "No, that's something else. That's the thing that takes us, the thing that brings us into the road. I don't know what it is, Gideon. I don't know where it comes from. I just know that when it catches you, you become like me. You become part of the highway, and you never leave. How do I stop it? How do I get away?" Clint was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again his voice was sad, resigned. The voice of someone who'd given up hope a long time ago. "I don't know if you can. I don't know if anyone can, once it starts following you. But there might be a way. There's a marker up ahead, mile 217. That's where it took me. That's where the road is thinnest, where the boundary between our world and this place almost disappears. If you can make it there, if you can find the marker that isn't there, maybe you can break through. Maybe you can get back to the real highway before it catches you. The marker that isn't there? What does that mean? You'll know when you see it, or when you don't see it. I'm sorry, Gideon. I'm sorry I can't explain it better. I'm sorry I can't help you more. I've been out here so long I don't remember how things work on the other side. The mile markers kept counting down. 229. 28, 227. The dark truck was right behind me now, filling my mirrors with its emptiness. So close, I could almost feel it breathing down my neck. I had 12 miles to go. 12-mile markers between me and whatever was waiting at 2 and 17, and I didn't know if I was going to make it. The engine was screaming, the trailer was swaying, and every instinct I had was telling me to slow down before I lost control and killed myself. But stopping meant letting that thing catch me. Stopping meant becoming like Clint, trapped in the road forever, waiting for someone who would never come. Gideon. It was Hazel 12, her voice suddenly cutting through the static. Gideon, I can hear you. I can hear both of you. Hazel 12, where are you? I'm on the highway. I'm passing mile 221 right now. The markers are counting up again for me. I don't know why, but I'm moving forward. I think I'm almost out. There's a marker at 217. Clint says that's where the road is thinnest, where I might be able to break through. If you can see me when I get there, if you can do something to help me, I'll try. I don't know what I can do, but I'll try. The dark truck surged forward, and I felt it hit me. Not a physical impact, not metal against metal, but something else. A wave of cold, a pressure that pushed against the back of my cab like a hand trying to shove me off the road. The temperature in the cab dropped 20 degrees in an instant, and I could see my breath fogging in front of my face as I gripped the wheel and fought to keep the truck steady. It was touching me now, reaching into my world, trying to drag me back into whatever void it had come from. I could see it ahead of me, a gap in the markers, an empty space where 217 should have been. The marker that wasn't there. It looked like nothing, just another stretch of roadside, but there was something wrong with the air around it. A shimmer, a distortion, like heat rising off asphalt on a summer day. That was the boundary Clint had talked about, the thin place where the road opened up and let things through from the other side. The dark truck hit me again, harder this time, and I felt something crack in the back of my mind. A memory surfacing, a moment I'd forgotten. Clint standing on the shoulder of the highway 15 years ago, looking back at me with an expression I didn't understand. Had I seen him that night? Had I watched him walk toward the marker that wasn't there and disappear into the shimmer, and then forgotten about it the same way I'd forgotten the mile markers and the static on the radio? Gideon, I can see you. Hazel to 12's voice was clear now, strong, cutting through the static like a beacon. I can see your truck up ahead. You're almost there. I saw her too. A set of headlights in the distance, coming toward me from the other direction, from the real highway where the markers counted up instead of down. She was on the other side of the boundary, in the world I'd left behind, and she was going to reach the gap at the same moment I did. The dark truck made one last push, throwing everything it had at me, and I felt the cold reach into my chest and start to squeeze. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except grip the wheel and aim for the shimmer ahead of me. Mile 217. The marker that wasn't there. The place where the road ended or began, depending on which side you were standing on. I drove into the shimmer and everything went white. The white lasted forever and no time at all. I don't know how to describe what it felt like to pass through that shimmer. It wasn't like driving through fog or rain or any kind of weather I'd experienced in 19 years on the road. It was more like the world itself had been erased, replaced by a blank space where nothing existed except the vibration of my engine and the pressure of my hands on the wheel. I couldn't see the road, couldn't see the desert, couldn't see anything except that featureless white that seemed to go on forever in every direction. And then it ended. I came out of the shimmer like waking up from a dream, the world snapping back into focus around me with a sudden jarring clarity. I was still on the highway, still moving west, still gripping the wheel with the hands that ached from how hard I'd been holding on. But everything had changed. The sky was different. Not black anymore, but a deep purple gray, the color of twilight even though it had been full dark when I entered the shimmer. The desert on either side of the road looked wrong too. The colors washed out and faded. The shapes of the rocks and plants blurred like I was seeing them through dirty glass. I checked my mirrors and felt my heart seize in my chest. The dark truck was gone. There was nothing behind me except the empty highway, stretching back toward the horizon without a single vehicle on it. No headlights, no shadows, no rumble of an engine following me through the night. I was alone, completely alone. And for a moment, I let myself believe that I'd made it, that I'd broken through the boundary and escaped whatever had been hunting me. Then I looked at the mile markers and realized how wrong I was. They were there, posted on the right side of the road at regular intervals, exactly where they should have been. But the numbers weren't counting up or down, they were all the same. Every single marker I passed said 217, mile 2teen, mile 2teen, mile 2teen, repeating over and over like a broken record, like a loop that had no beginning and no end. I'd driven through the shimmer and come out on the other side, but I hadn't escaped. I'd gone deeper. I was in the place between the miles now, the void that Clint had described. The nowhere space where the road kept going but never got anywhere. I kept driving because I didn't know what else to do. The highway stretched out ahead of me, straight and flat and endless, passing through a landscape that looked like the desert I knew, but felt fundamentally different. The colors were wrong. The proportions were wrong. Even the quality of the light was wrong. Too flat, too even, without any of the depth and variation that came from a real sun in a real sky. It was like driving through a photograph of the desert instead of the desert itself, a two-dimensional representation of something that should have been three-dimensional. The CB crackled, and Clint's voice came through. "You made it. I wasn't sure you would." I grabbed the mic, anger flaring in my chest alongside the fear. "Made it where, Clint? Where the hell am I?" "You're in the road, the real road, the one underneath all the highways and interstates and freeways. The one that's always been there since before there were trucks or cars or people to drive them. This is where we are, Gideon. This is where all of us are, everyone who's ever been taken. How do I get out? How do I get back to the real world? I don't know. I've been trying to figure that out for 15 years, and I haven't found an answer yet. Maybe there isn't one. Maybe, once you're here forever." I didn't want to accept that. I couldn't accept that. I had a life back there, a job, people who would miss me if I disappeared. I wasn't going to spend eternity driving through some shadow version of the desert, trapped in a loop that never ended and never changed. There had to be a way out. There had to be something I could do. "Where are you?" I asked. "If we're both in this place, we should be able to find each other. Maybe together we can figure out how to escape. I'm on the road, same as you, but it doesn't work like that here. Distance doesn't mean the same thing. I could be right next to you or 1,000 miles away, and there'd be no way to tell the difference. The road shows you what it wants to show you. It takes you where it wants to take you." Then how are we talking? How can I hear you on the radio? The radio's different. It goes everywhere, reaches everywhere. That's how we stay connected, all of us who are trapped here. We talk to each other, share stories, try to remember what it was like to be alive. It's the only thing that keeps us sane. I thought about Hazel 12, the fear in her voice when she'd told me about the truck following her. There's another driver out there, a woman, handle of Hazel 12. She was on the real highway, moving toward the shimmer from the other direction. Is she here too? Did she get pulled in? I don't know. I haven't heard her since you came through. She might still be on the other side, might have made it past the boundary before it closed. Or she might be here somewhere, driving her own loop, trying to find her own way out. Clint paused, and when he spoke again his voice was heavier, more tired. There are a lot of us in here, Gideon, more than you'd think. Drivers who disappeared over the years, people who vanished on this stretch of road and were never seen again. We're all here, all driving, all looking for something we're never going to find. I kept moving through the gray twilight, watching the mile markers repeat their endless 217, trying to understand what Clint was telling me. All those drivers who'd gone missing over the years, all those cases that were never solved, they were here, trapped in this void, driving forever on a road that went nowhere. It was worse than death, worse than anything I could have imagined. At least, when you died, it was over. At least you got to stop. What about the thing that was following me? I asked. The dark truck. Where did it go? It's still out there. It's always out there, on the edges, waiting for new people to come through. It doesn't come into this place very often. It doesn't need to. Once you're here, you're not going anywhere. It just patrols the boundary, catches people who try to cross, brings them in. It almost got me. Right before I hit the shimmer, it was right on top of me. I could feel it touching me, reaching into the cab. You're lucky you made it through before it finished. If it had caught you on the other side, you would have become like it. Not a driver anymore, not a person. Just a thing that hunts, a piece of the road that brings people in. That's the worst fate, Gideon. That's what happens to the ones who give up, who stop fighting. They become part of the machinery. I shuddered at the thought of it. All those years I'd spent on the road, I'd never thought about what it might be doing to me, how it might be changing me without my knowing. I'd always loved driving, loved the freedom and the solitude and the endless miles of possibility. But maybe that love was dangerous. Maybe it was a trap, a way of seducing you until you couldn't tell the difference between yourself and the road anymore. The landscape outside my windows started to change. The washed-out desert gave way to something else, a long stretch of highway that looked almost normal, with proper lighting and proper colors and what appeared to be other vehicles in the distance. I felt a surge of hope that maybe I was approaching some kind of exit, some boundary that would let me back into the real world. But as I got closer, I realized the truth. They were trucks, hundreds of them, parked on both sides of the highway, stretching away into the distance as far as I could see. Old trucks and new trucks, semis and straight jobs, every make and model from every era of trucking history. Some of them looked like they'd been there for decades, their paint faded and their tires flat, settled into the ground like they'd grown roots. Others looked brand new, their chrome still shining, their engines still warm. All of them were empty. All of them were waiting. "What is this?" I asked into the mic. "What am I looking at?" This is where the trucks go when the drivers give up. When you stop fighting, when you accept that you're never going to get out, you park here and you let go. Your truck stays, but you, the part of you that's still human, you fade away. You become part of the road, part of the nothing that fills in all the spaces. It's not painful, from what I've heard. It's just empty. You stop being you, and you start being everything else. I drove past the rows of parked trucks, feeling their emptiness pressing against me from both sides. I recognized some of the models from my early years in the industry, Freightliners and Kenworths from the 80s and 90s, trucks I hadn't seen on the road in years. Their drivers were gone, absorbed into the void, leaving nothing behind except metal and rubber and the faint echo of lives that used to be. Is this what's going to happen to me? I asked. Am I going to end up like them? Not if you keep fighting. Not if you refuse to give up. That's the only way to survive in here, Gideon. You have to keep driving, keep looking for a way out, even when it feels hopeless. The moment you stop, the moment you accept that this is forever, that's when you start to fade. I thought about what he was saying, about the strength it would take to keep going day after day, year after year, with no hope of escape and no end in sight. I didn't know if I had that kind of strength. I didn't know if anyone did. 15 years Clint had been in here. 15 years of driving in circles and talking to ghosts, and he was still holding on. That was something. That was more than I would have expected from anyone. How do you do it? I asked him. How do you keep going after all this time? I think about the people I left behind. My wife, my kids, all the people who never knew what happened to me. I think about how much they must have suffered, not knowing if I was alive or dead. And I tell myself that I owe it to them to keep trying. Even if I never find a way out, even if I drive these roads forever, I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to let this place turn me into nothing. The parked trucks fell away behind me, and I was back on the empty highway, driving through the gray twilight toward nothing. I thought about my own life, the people I'd left behind. I didn't have a wife or kids like Clint did. I had a girlfriend who was getting tired of waiting for me to come home, a sister who I barely talked to anymore, a father in a nursing home who might not even remember my name. I'd spent so much time on the road that I'd let all my connections wither, had let the miles pile up between me and everyone who used to matter to me. Maybe that was why I was here. Maybe the road had sensed how much of myself I'd already given to it, how little I had left to lose. Maybe it had decided I was ready to become part of it completely, to let go of the last scraps of my humanity and dissolve into the nothing that stretched out in every direction. I wasn't going to let that happen. I'd spent 19 years giving myself to the road, and I was done. I was going to find a way out of this place, and when I did, I was going to change everything. I was going to go home and rebuild the connections I'd lost, reconnect with the people I'd abandoned, become someone who existed outside the cab of a truck for the first time in almost 2 decades. The road had taken enough from me. It wasn't going to take the rest. Clint, I said into the mic, you said the shimmer at mile 217 was where the boundary was thinnest, where the road opened up and let things through. Is there another place like that in here? Another thin spot where we might be able to break back through to the other side? He was quiet for a moment, thinking. There might be. I've heard stories from some of the other drivers, rumors about places where the boundary gets weak, but I've never found one myself. Every time I think I'm getting close, the road shifts and I end up somewhere else. It's like the place knows what I'm looking for and keeps moving it away from me. What if we looked together? What if we both drove toward the same spot at the same time? Maybe, together, we'd have enough strength to punch through before the road could stop us. I don't know, Gideon. We've never tried anything like that. We've never worked together against this place. Then maybe it's time we started. Maybe that's what's been missing all along. People fighting together instead of alone. Where are these thin spots supposed to be? Give me a direction. Give me something to aim for. Clint told me about the rumors he'd heard over the years. A bridge that sometimes appeared over a dry riverbed. leading to a stretch of highway that looked like the real world, a truck stop that flickered in and out of existence, populated by drivers who might have been alive or might have been dead. A stretch of road where the mile markers sometimes counted normally, going up instead of repeating, offering a few miles of progress before resetting back to the loop. They were all in different directions, all in different parts of this void, and there was no way to know if any of them were real. I picked one and started driving toward it, the bridge, the one that led to the highway that looked like the real world. Clint said it was supposed to be somewhere to the south, in a part of the void that he'd never explored himself. I didn't know if I could trust the directions, didn't know if south meant anything in a place where distance and space didn't work right, but I had to try something. I had to keep moving, keep fighting, or I was going to end up like those empty trucks on the roadside, fading away into nothing. The highway curved to the south and the landscape started to change again. The gray twilight deepened into something closer to night, and the desert gave way to rocky canyons and steep cliffs that loomed on either side of the road. It looked more like the terrain around Flagstaff than the flat scrubland of southern Arizona, but that didn't mean anything. Geography didn't work in this place. The road showed you what it wanted to show you. I'd been driving for what felt like hours when I first heard the other engines. They came from everywhere at once. Ahead of me, behind me, on both sides, a rumble of motors that grew and grew until it filled the cab and drowned out the sound of my own truck. I checked my mirrors and saw headlights appearing in the distance, dozens of them, converging on me from every direction. Other trucks, other drivers, all of them moving toward the same spot where I was. "Clint, what's happening? There are trucks everywhere." They know what you're trying to do. The road knows. It's calling everyone in, trying to stop you from reaching the bridge. Are they going to attack me? Are they going to try to run me off the road? No. They're not hostile, most of them. They're just scared. They've been in here so long they've forgotten what hope feels like. They're coming to watch you fail, to see you give up like everyone else does. It makes them feel better about their own surrender. The trucks were getting closer, filling the highway ahead of me and behind me, boxing me in just like the dark truck had done before I passed through the shimmer. But these weren't shadows or voids or hunting machines. These were real trucks with real drivers, people who'd been trapped in this place for years or decades, people who'd lost everything and had nothing left except the driving. I could see them now through my windshield, the outlines of cabs and trailers, the glow of headlights and marker lights, a whole convoy of the lost converging on this stretch of road. Some of them were old, their trucks battered and worn from years of driving without maintenance. Others were newer, still shiny and clean, barely marked by their time in the void. They were all watching me, waiting to see what I would do. I kept my foot on the gas and aimed for the narrowing gap between them. If they wanted to stop me, they were going to have to hit me. I wasn't slowing down, wasn't pulling over, wasn't giving up. I'd made my decision and I was sticking to it. The convoy parted. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a collision, maybe a confrontation, maybe a wall of steel that I'd have to crash through or turn back from. But instead, the trucks pulled aside, opening a lane down the center of the highway, letting me pass between them like an honor guard. They were still watching, still waiting, but they weren't stopping me. They were letting me try. One of them keyed his CB as I passed, and his voice came through my speaker, old and tired, but with something underneath that might have been hope. "Give 'em hell, driver. Give 'em hell for all of us." I drove through the convoy and out the other side, and the trucks fell away behind me, returning to their own endless loops, their own private prisons. But I felt something from them as I left, a kind of energy or a tension that stayed with me as I continued toward the bridge. They were with me now, all of them, watching to see if I could do what none of them had been able to do, watching to see if there was really a way out. The road climbed into the mountains, winding through passes and switchbacks that would have been treacherous in a loaded truck. But I wasn't loaded anymore. Somewhere in the void, I'd lost my trailer, lost my cargo, lost everything except the cab and the engine and the fuel in my tanks. I was lighter than I'd been in years, more maneuverable, able to take the curves faster than I would have dared on the real highway. Maybe that was an advantage. Maybe the road had taken something from me, but given me something in return. I came around a blind corner and saw it. The bridge. It stretched across a deep canyon, a steel and concrete structure that looked like it had been built in the 1950s and never updated since. The style was old, the materials were old, even the faded paint on the support beams looked like it belonged to another era. But it was real. More real than anything else I'd seen since entering the void. More solid and present and three-dimensional. This was the thin spot Clint had told me about. The place where the boundary between the void and the real world grew weak. And on the other side of the bridge, I could see it. The highway. The real highway, with proper mile markers and proper lighting, and the distant glow of what might have been a town or a truck stop somewhere on the horizon. It was right there, less than a quarter mile away, and all I had to do was cross the bridge and I'd be back. I'd be free. I pressed the accelerator and started across. The bridge groaned under my wheels. I could feel it swaying, feel the old structure protesting against the weight of my truck, and I wondered how long it had been since anyone had tried to cross. Maybe years. Maybe decades. Maybe the bridge had been waiting all this time, holding itself together through some supernatural effort, ready to collapse the moment someone finally tried to use it. I was halfway across when the dark truck appeared. It came out of nowhere, materializing on the bridge ahead of me, blocking my path to the other side. No lights, no sound, just that void of darkness that was blacker than anything natural, shaped like a truck but empty of everything that made a truck real. It had been waiting for me. It had known I would come here, known I would try to cross, and it had positioned itself to stop me. I hit the brakes and felt the cab shudder as the truck slowed, the bridge swaying harder now with the sudden shift in momentum. The dark truck didn't move, didn't react, just sat there in the middle of the span, daring me to try and get past. "Clint," I said into the mic, "the dark truck is here. It's on the bridge. It's blocking my way. I know, I can see it." His voice was different now, closer, and when I looked in my mirrors I saw another set of headlights coming up behind me. Clint's truck, emerging from the void, crossing onto the bridge. "I'm coming, Gideon. I'm not going to let you face it alone." He pulled up beside me, and for the first time in 15 years I saw Clint Yarborough in the flesh. He looked older than I remembered, worn down by years of driving without rest, but his eyes were still the same, sharp, determined, alive. He wasn't a ghost, wasn't a memory. He was still a person, still fighting, still refusing to give in. "We go together," he said through the open window of his cab. "We hit it at the same time, from both sides. Maybe together we're strong enough to punch through. And if we're not—" He smiled, and there was something fierce in it, something that had been missing from his voice on the radio. "Then at least we tried. At least we went down fighting instead of fading away." I looked at the dark truck blocking our path, at the highway waiting on the other side of the bridge, at Clint beside me with his hands on his wheel and his foot on his accelerator. I thought about all the drivers back in the void, watching us, waiting to see what would happen. I thought about Hazel 12 wherever she was, hoping we'd find a way through. "Together," I said. We floored it. The bridge screamed beneath us as we accelerated side by side, our engines roaring in unison, our trucks building speed as we hurtled toward the darkness blocking our path. The dark truck didn't move. didn't try to evade us, just sat there waiting for the impact like it had been waiting for this moment for years. Maybe it had. Maybe this was always how it was going to end. Two drivers who refused to give up, throwing themselves at the wall between the void and the world, betting everything on one last desperate charge. We hit the dark truck at the same moment, from both sides. I don't remember the impact. I don't remember the sound or the feeling or anything that happened in the instant when we collided. There was just a moment of pure white, the same featureless blank I'd experienced when I passed through the shimmer at mile 217, and then I was on the other side of the bridge. The highway stretched out ahead of me, real and solid, with mile markers counting up and headlights in the distance and the first glow of dawn on the eastern horizon. I was out. I was free. I'd broken through the boundary and made it back to the world where I belonged. I pulled over to the shoulder and stopped the truck, my hands shaking so badly I could barely set the brake. I sat there for a long time, staring out the windshield at the road, waiting for it to disappear, waiting for the void to reach out and drag me back. But it didn't. The highway stayed solid, the dawn kept brightening, and the world remained exactly as it should be. I grabbed the mic and keyed it with trembling fingers. "Clint? Clint, are you there? Did you make it?" Static, silence. The empty hiss of a radio that had no one on the other end. I called his name again and again, cycling through channels searching for any sign that he'd come through with me. But there was nothing. Clint was gone, still trapped in the void, sacrificed to the impact that had broken me free. He'd given me my escape and paid for it with his own, staying behind so that I could get through. I sat on the shoulder of the highway and watched the sun come up, and I thought about Clint Yarborough, who had been my partner and my friend, who had been trapped in the road for 15 years, and had used his one chance at freedom to save someone else. I thought about all the drivers still in there, still circling, still hoping for a way out that might never come. I thought about Hazel 12, wherever she was, and hoped that she had made it, that she was out there somewhere on the real highway, driving toward home. And I thought about the road, the real road underneath all the highways, the hungry thing that waited in the spaces between the miles. It was still there. It would always be there. And sooner or later, it would find someone else. I put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the highway, heading west toward Tucson. I had a delivery to make, a job to finish, a life to start over. But I knew I would never forget what I'd seen in the void, what I'd lost there, what I'd learned about the road and the price it demanded from the people who drove it. The mile markers counted up as I drove, 218, 219, 220, and I watched each one pass with a gratitude I'd never felt before. They were just numbers on signs, just pieces of metal on the roadside, but they meant I was moving forward, making progress, going somewhere instead of nowhere. They meant I was free, but I couldn't stop thinking about Clint, about the look on his face when we hit the accelerator and charged the dark truck together. He'd smiled, he'd looked happy for the first time since I'd heard his voice on the radio. Maybe that was worth something. Maybe, in a way, he'd gotten what he wanted. Maybe we both had. I made my delivery in Tucson 3 hours late. The distribution center manager wasn't happy about it, gave me a lecture about schedules and contracts and the importance of reliability in the freight industry. I stood there and took it, nodding at the right moments, saying the right things to smooth over the situation. But I wasn't really listening. I was thinking about Clint, about the void, about everything I'd seen and done in the hours since I'd lost my mile markers on a dark stretch of I-10. The manager's complaints seemed very small and very far away, like they belonged to a world I'd left behind and wasn't sure I could find my way back to. When he finally let me go, I drove to a truck stop on the outskirts of town and parked in the back row where it was quiet. I sat in my cab for a long time, staring out the windshield at nothing, trying to process what had happened. I'd been in the void. I'd seen the place where drivers went when the road took them, seen the trucks they left behind when they gave up, seen the boundary between that world and this one. I'd watched Clint sacrifice himself to get me through, staying behind in the darkness so that I could come back to the light. It was too much to absorb, too much to make sense of. I felt like I'd been gone for years instead of hours, like the person who'd left El Paso the night before was someone I barely remembered. I thought about calling someone, my girlfriend, my sister, maybe even my dispatcher, to tell him I needed some time off. But I didn't know what I would say to any of them, didn't know how to explain what I'd been through in a way that wouldn't make me sound crazy. So I just sat there, watching the other trucks come and go, listening to the sounds of the truck stop around me, trying to convince myself that I was really back, that the void hadn't followed me through the shimmer, and wasn't waiting just around the corner to pull me in again. Around noon, I finally got out of the cab and walked into the truck stop to get some food. I wasn't hungry, but I needed to do something normal, something that would anchor me to the real world and remind me what ordinary life felt like. I ordered a sandwich and a cup of coffee at the counter and sat down in a booth by the window, watching the parking lot and the highway beyond it. The mile markers were visible from where I sat. Green signs with white numbers, counting up as they should, marking the distance between here and everywhere else. They looked solid and permanent, like they'd always been there and always would be. But I knew better now. I knew how easily they could disappear. I was halfway through my sandwich when I heard it. A voice on the truck stop's CB radio, the one they kept behind the counter so drivers could listen to the chatter while they ate. It was faint, broken up by static, but I recognized it immediately. I'd heard it too many times in the last 12 hours to ever forget it. "Anyone copy? This is Hazel 12. Can anyone hear me?" I dropped my sandwich and ran to the counter, pushing past a startled waitress to get to the radio. The clerk behind the register looked at me like I was crazy, but I didn't care. I grabbed the mic and keyed it, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hazel 12, this is Rames. I copy you. Where are you? Are you okay?" The static crackled and hissed, and for a long moment there was nothing. Then her voice came back, clearer this time, strong enough that I could hear the relief in it. "Rames, oh thank God. I thought I was alone out here. I thought everyone was gone. Where are you? Did you make it through? Are you on the real highway? I don't know. I think so. The markers are counting up again, and I can see other trucks on the road. But I can't find anyone to talk to. Every frequency I try is dead. You're the first voice I've heard in I don't know how long. Hours, maybe. It feels like days." I looked at the clerk, who was staring at me with a mixture of confusion and concern. "Is there a way to patch this through to the road, to reach someone who's driving right now? Mister, that radio barely reaches the parking lot. If she's out on the highway, she's not hearing you through this. But she was hearing me. Somehow, despite the limitations of the equipment, despite the distance and the static and everything that should have made communication impossible, Hazel 12 was hearing my voice, and I was hearing hers. Maybe it was a residual effect from the void. Some connection that had been forged when we were both trapped in that place between the miles. Maybe the radio worked differently for people who'd seen what we'd seen. "Hazel 12, listen to me. I'm at a truck stop in Tucson, south side of town, right off the interstate. Can you get here? Can you find your way to this location?" "I think so. I'm westbound on I-10, maybe an hour out. I'll look for your truck in the lot. I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere until you arrive." The static swelled and her voice disappeared, lost in the noise. But she'd heard me and she was coming. Another driver who'd been in the void, another survivor who'd made it back to the real world. I wasn't alone in this, whatever came next. I wasn't going to face it alone. I went back to my booth and finished my coffee, watching the highway through the window. The waitress came by to ask if I wanted anything else, and I ordered another cup just to have something to do with my hands. The minutes crawled by, each one feeling longer than the last, and I kept looking at the entrance to the parking lot, waiting for a truck to turn in, waiting for Hazel 12 to appear. She arrived just over an hour later, a blue Peterbilt 579 with a refrigerated trailer, pulling into the lot and parking in the first available spot. I was out of the booth and through the door before she'd even set her brake, crossing the parking lot at a half run, needing to see her, needing to confirm that she was real and that I wasn't imagining things. She climbed down from her cab as I approached, a woman in her 40s with short dark hair and tired eyes, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that looked like she'd been sleeping in it. She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see in her face the same shell-shocked expression I'd been wearing all morning. The same look of someone who'd been through something impossible and was still trying to make sense of it. "Rames?" she asked. "That's me. You're Hazel 12? "Alma Vasquez. Hazel 12 is just my handle." She held out her hand and I shook it. Her grip was firm, solid, real. "You made it out. I wasn't sure anyone did. I made it out, barely. There was another driver in there with me, someone I used to know. He helped me get through the boundary. He didn't make it himself." Alma's face tightened with sympathy. "I'm sorry. I heard you talking to him on the radio. Before I lost the signal, he sounded like a good man. He was. He was the best partner I ever had." We stood there in the parking lot, two strangers who'd been through something together that no one else would ever understand. I wanted to ask her everything, what she'd seen in the void, how she'd found her way out, whether she'd encountered the dark truck or the convoy of lost drivers or any of the other things I'd experienced. But I didn't know where to start, didn't know how to put any of it into words. So I just asked her if she wanted to get some coffee, and she said yes, and we walked into the truck stop together like it was the most normal thing in the world. We sat in a booth in the back, away from the other customers, and we talked for 3 hours. Alma told me her story, how she'd been running a load of produce from California to Texas when the mile markers started disappearing, how she'd heard my voice on the radio and realized she wasn't alone, how she'd been heading toward the shimmer at mile 217 when she saw me approaching from the other direction. She said she'd tried to reach me, tried to do something to help, but the boundary had closed before she could get there. She'd been thrown back onto the real highway, the markers counting up again, the void sealed behind her like it had never existed. "I thought you were gone," she said. "I thought the road had taken you and I'd never know what happened. I've been driving in circles for hours, trying to find someone to talk to, trying to figure out if any of it was real. When I heard your voice on the radio," she shook her head, "it was the best thing I've ever heard." I told her my story too, everything that had happened from the moment I lost my markers to the moment I came out on the other side of the bridge. I told her about Clint, about the void and the empty trucks and the convoy of lost drivers. I told her about the dark truck, about how it had tried to stop us at the boundary and how Clint had sacrificed himself to break us through. She listened without interrupting, her coffee growing cold in front of her, her eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "What do we do now? How do we go back to normal life after something like this?" It was a good question, and I didn't have a good answer. I'd been asking myself the same thing since I pulled off the highway that morning, and I still didn't know. The void was real. The road was hungry. There were drivers trapped in that place between the miles, driving forever, waiting for someone to find a way to free them. How did you go back to hauling freight and paying bills and worrying about schedules when you knew something like that existed? How did you pretend the world was normal when you'd seen what was underneath it? I don't know, I told her honestly. But I know we can't just forget about it. We can't pretend it didn't happen and go on with our lives. There are people in there, Alma. Drivers who've been trapped for years, decades, waiting for someone to help them. Clint gave his life to get me out. I owe it to him to do something with that. What can we do? We barely made it out ourselves. We don't know how the void works, don't know how to find the boundaries or open them up. We're just two drivers. What can we possibly do against something like that? We can start by finding others, other drivers who've been in the void and made it back, other people who know what's out there. We can share information, compare experiences, try to figure out how the road works and how to fight it. We can't be the only ones this has happened to. There have to be others. Alma looked skeptical, but I could see something else in her eyes too, a spark of interest, maybe even hope. She'd been through the same thing I had, seen the same horrors, felt the same despair. And like me, she'd survived. She'd come back with knowledge that most people didn't have, an understanding of the road that could be used to help others. Maybe that was why we'd made it out when so many hadn't. Maybe we were supposed to do something with what we'd learned. Where would we even start? She asked. How do you find people who've been to a place that doesn't exist? The same way I found you. The radio. The trucking community. Word of mouth at truck stops and rest areas. Drivers talk to each other, share stories, pass along warnings about dangerous stretches of road. If there are others out there who've experienced what we experienced, someone will know about them. She thought about it for a moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, I'm not saying I'm in, but I'm not saying I'm out either. Let's see what we can find. Let's see if there's anyone else out there who knows what we know. We exchanged phone numbers and promised to stay in touch, and then Alma went back to her truck to get some sleep before continuing her run to Texas. I watched her drive out of the parking lot, her taillights disappearing into the flow of traffic on the interstate, and I felt something I hadn't felt since before the void. Something like purpose. I didn't leave Tucson that day. Instead, I got a motel room near the truck stop and spent the afternoon and evening making phone calls, reaching out to everyone I knew in the trucking industry. I called other drivers I'd worked with over the years, dispatchers and mechanics and truck stop owners, anyone who might have heard stories about the void, or the missing mile markers, or the dark truck that hunted drivers in the empty places. Most of them thought I was crazy, or playing some kind of joke, or maybe having a breakdown from too many hours on the road. But a few of them got quiet when I described what I'd experienced. A few of them said they'd heard things, seen things, knew people who'd had similar encounters. I wrote down every name and number they gave me, building a list of potential contacts, people who might have knowledge that could help me understand what I was dealing with. It wasn't much, a handful of names scattered across the Southwest, most of them probably dead ends or misunderstandings, but it was a start. It was something to work with. That night, I lay in bed in my motel room and stared at the ceiling, thinking about Clint. 15 years he'd been in the void, driving in circles, waiting for someone to come along who could hear him. 15 years of hope slowly dying, of watching other drivers give up and fade away, of fighting to stay human in a place that wanted to turn him into nothing. And then I'd come along, and he'd used his one chance at freedom to save me instead of himself. He'd stayed behind so that I could get through. He'd given me the gift of my life, and all I could do in return was try to make it worth something. I thought about what he'd said on the radio, about thinking about the people he'd left behind as a way to keep himself from giving up. His wife, his kids, all the people who'd never known what happened to him, They'd spent 15 years wondering, grieving, maybe hoping he was still alive somewhere even though all the evidence said otherwise. They deserved to know the truth. They deserved to know that Clint hadn't abandoned them, hadn't run away or gotten himself killed through negligence or recklessness. He'd been taken by something beyond his control, and he'd spent every moment since then fighting to get back to them. I didn't know how to tell them that. I didn't know how to explain what had happened in a way that wouldn't sound like the ravings of a lunatic, but I knew I had to try. I owed Clint that much. I owed him the truth, and so did his family. The next morning, I started the process of tracking down Clint's wife. It wasn't easy. 15 years is a long time, and people move and change and disappear from the places where you expect to find them. But I had Clint's full name and the general area where he'd lived, and I was patient and persistent in my searching. I made phone calls, sent emails, searched public records and social media. I hit dead ends and false leads and people who didn't want to talk to me. But I kept at it, because I'd promised myself I would, because I owed it to Clint and to myself. It took me 3 weeks to find her. Her name was Dolores Yarborough, and she lived in a small town in New Mexico, about 100 miles from the stretch of I-10 where Clint had disappeared. She'd remarried a few years after Clint was declared dead, had a couple more kids, built a new life for herself. But she still had his name, still held on to that connection to the man she'd lost. When I called her and explained who I was, that I'd been Clint's partner back when he disappeared, she agreed to meet with me. She said she'd always wanted to know what happened that night, even if the answer was painful. She said not knowing was worse than anything the truth could be. I drove to her town on a sunny afternoon in October, almost exactly a month after my night in the void. Her house was a modest place on a quiet street, with a well-kept yard and a pickup truck in the driveway. She met me at the door, a woman in her late 50s with gray-streaked hair and kind eyes that looked like they'd seen their share of sorrow. She invited me in, offered me coffee, and we sat in her living room while I tried to figure out how to tell her what I'd come to say. I started with the facts she already knew, that I'd been asleep in the back of the truck when Clint disappeared, that I'd woken up to find him gone, and had never been able to explain what happened. I told her about the investigation, the searches, the theories that the police had come up with and eventually abandoned. I told her how much it had affected me, how I'd spent years wondering and blaming myself and trying to understand. She listened patiently, nodding at the things she already knew, waiting for me to get to the part she didn't. Then I told her about the void. I told her everything. The missing mile markers, the dark truck, the shimmer at mile 217, the place between the miles where drivers went when the road took them. I told her about hearing Clint's voice on the radio, about finding him in the void after 15 years, about learning that he'd been there the whole time, fighting to stay human, refusing to give up. I told her about the bridge, about our plan to break through the boundary together, about how Clint had sacrificed himself to get me out. When I finished, Dolores was crying, tears rolling down her cheeks, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. I didn't know if she believed me. I wouldn't have blamed her if she didn't. But I could see that my words had reached her, had touched something deep inside her that had been waiting for answers for a very long time. "He talked about me?" she asked finally. In that place, after all those years, he still talked about me. All the time. He said thinking about you and the kids was what kept him going. He said he owed it to you to keep fighting, even when it felt hopeless. She broke down then, sobbing into her hands, and I sat there feeling useless and intrusive, and like maybe I'd made a terrible mistake by coming here. But after a few minutes, she composed herself, wiped her eyes, and looked at me with something that might have been gratitude. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for telling me. I know it sounds crazy, and I don't know if I believe all of it, but thank you. At least now I know he didn't leave us on purpose. At least now I know he was thinking about us at the end." "He wasn't at the end," I said. "He's still in there, still driving. The void doesn't kill you, it just traps you. Clint's still fighting Dolores. He's still hoping someone will find a way to get him out." She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her wrestling with what I was telling her. It was a lot to accept, a lot to believe. The idea that her first husband was still alive, still conscious, still existing in some impossible place between the mile markers of an Arizona highway. It went against everything she knew about how the world worked. But I could also see that she wanted to believe it. She wanted to think that Clint was still out there, still holding on, still the man she'd married all those years ago. "Is there anything we can do?" she asked. "Is there any way to help him?" "I don't know. But I'm going to find out. I'm going to learn everything I can about the void and how it works, and I'm going to find a way to get people out. Clint saved my life. I'm not going to give up on him." She reached out and took my hand, squeezing it hard. "Find him," she said. "Please. If there's any way to bring him back, find him." I promised her I would try. I drove back to Tucson that night, thinking about Dolores and Clint and all the years they'd lost. Thinking about the void and the drivers trapped inside it. The empty trucks and the fading souls and the dark thing that hunted the boundaries. Thinking about Alma and the list of names I'd gathered. All the people who might have knowledge or experience that could help me understand what I was fighting against. I called Alma when I got back to my motel room and told her about my visit with Dolores. She listened quietly, and when I finished she said she'd been doing some research of her own. She'd found a few more names, a few more leads, people who claimed to have had experiences similar to ours. She said she was starting to believe that we might actually be able to do something, might actually be able to make a difference. "There's something else," she said. "I've been going through old trucking forums and message boards, looking for posts about the void or the missing mile markers. Most of it's nonsense. Urban legends and creepypastas and people making stuff up for attention. But I found something that looks real. A post from about 10 years ago, from a driver who claimed he'd been in the void and made it out. He said he'd found a way to communicate with the drivers inside, a way to send messages back and forth across the boundary. Did he say how? No. The post was incomplete. It looked like he'd started to explain and then stopped in the middle. But he left a location. A mile marker on I-10, not far from where we went in. He said that was where the boundary was weakest, where communication was possible. He said if anyone wanted to learn more, they should go there and listen. I felt something stir in my chest. Hope, maybe, or excitement, or the first hint of a plan coming together. A way to communicate with the void, a way to reach Clint and the others, to let them know they hadn't been forgotten. It might not be a way to get them out, but it was something. It was a start. "Where's the mile marker?" I asked. "Mile 217, right where you went in." Of course it was. The marker that wasn't there. The thin place where the boundary between worlds grew weak. It made sense that communication would be possible there, that voices could cross over in a place where everything else did too. "I'm going," I said. "Tonight. I need to know if it's real. I'm coming with you. We started this together. We'll see it through together." We met at a truck stop outside of Tucson and drove east in separate trucks, running as a 2-vehicle convoy through the darkness. The highway was quiet, the traffic sparse, and I found myself watching the mile markers with an intensity I'd never felt before. They were all there, counting up as they should, 200 and 210 and 215, normal, predictable. Exactly what they were supposed to be. But as we approached mile 217, I felt something change. A pressure in the air, a weight that hadn't been there before. The boundary was close. The thin place was just ahead, and whatever existed on the other side was aware of our approach. We pulled over at the spot where the marker should have been, the empty stretch of roadside, the gap in the sequence. The post was still missing, just like before, but I could see the shimmer in the air now, the distortion that marked the edge of the void. It was faint, barely visible, but it was there. The boundary was real, and it was close. I got out of my cab and walked toward the shimmer, feeling the pressure increase with every step. Alma followed behind me, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating nothing but empty desert and the faint ripple of something that shouldn't exist. "What do we do?" she asked. "How do we make contact?" The post said to listen, so let's listen. I pulled out my handheld CB radio and turned it on, scanning through frequencies. Static on every channel just like before, but this time I could hear something underneath it. Voices, faint and distant, like whispers from the bottom of a well. I couldn't make out words, couldn't identify individuals, but they were there. People talking, communicating, existing in a place that shouldn't be possible. I keyed the mic and spoke into the shimmer. "This is Gideon Rames calling any drivers in the void. Can anyone hear me? Come back." The static swelled and shifted, and then, "Gideon?" It was Clint's voice. Faint, broken, but unmistakably him. "Clint, I'm here. I'm at the marker. The place where we came through. Can you hear me?" "I can hear you. Barely, but I can hear you. Are you okay? Did you make it back?" "I made it back. I'm safe. I'm here with another driver, someone else who was in the void. We're trying to find a way to help you, to help everyone who's trapped in there." There was a long pause, and when Clint spoke again, I could hear something in his voice that I hadn't heard before. Hope. "You came back. I didn't think anyone would come back. I promised you I would. I promised Dolores. Loris. You found her? You talked to her? I told her everything. She knows you're still out there, still fighting. She asked me to find you. She asked me to bring you home." Another pause, longer this time. When Clint spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "Tell her I love her. Tell her I never stopped. Tell her I'm going to find a way out of here if it takes me another 15 years. Tell her." The static surged and his voice disappeared, lost in the noise. I called his name, called the void, called anyone who might be listening. But the connection was gone. The boundary had closed, at least for now, and the voices from the other side had faded back into silence. I stood there at mile 217, staring at the shimmer in the air, and I felt something settle into place inside me. This was real. Communication was possible. I could reach Clint and the others, could let them know they hadn't been forgotten, could work with them to find a way to break the boundary and set them free. It wasn't going to be easy. I had no idea how long it would take or what it would require. But it was possible. That was what mattered. As long as it was possible, I wasn't going to give up. Alma put her hand on my shoulder. "We'll find a way," she said. "Whatever it takes, we'll find a way. I know we will." We drove back to Tucson as the sun was coming up, the sky turning pink and orange ahead of us, the mile markers counting up like a promise that the world still made sense. I thought about everything that had happened in the past month. The void, the dark truck, Clint and Dolores and all the drivers who were still trapped in the place between the miles. I thought about the list of names in my pocket, all the people I still needed to contact, all the knowledge I still needed to gather. I thought about the shimmer at mile 217, the thin place where communication was possible, where the boundary between worlds could be crossed. I was a trucker. I'd spent 19 years hauling freight from one place to another, driving the same routes over and over, watching the miles pile up without ever really getting anywhere. But now I had something else to do, something that mattered more than any load I'd ever carried. I was going to find a way to free the drivers in the void. I was going to bring Clint home to his wife. I was going to fight the road and everything that lived in it. And I wasn't going to stop until I'd won. It's been 6 months since that night at mile 217. 6 months of research and investigation, of phone calls and meetings and long conversations with people who've seen what I've seen. I've found others like me and Alma, drivers who've been in the void and made it back, people who know the truth about the road and are willing to fight against it. We've formed a network, an informal community of survivors who share information and support each other, and work together to understand what we're dealing with. We've learned a lot in those 6 months. We've mapped the thin places, the spots along the highways where the boundary is weak and communication is possible. We've figured out some of the rules that govern the void, how it traps people, how it keeps them driving in circles, how the dark truck hunts new victims. We've even managed to help a few drivers escape, guiding them through the shimmer the way Clint guided me, using our radios to lead them to the boundaries and break them through. But we've also lost people, drivers who went into the void to try and rescue others and never came back, drivers who got too close to the dark truck and were taken before we could help them. Every victory comes with a cost. And sometimes I wonder if we're really making a difference or just rearranging deck chairs on a sinking ship. I still talk to Clint when I can. The connection at mile 217 isn't always available. Some nights the shimmer is strong and we can communicate for hours. Other nights it's barely there and I can't get through at all. But when we do connect, he tells me what's happening in the void, which drivers are close to giving up and might need encouragement, which thin places might be worth exploring. He's become a kind of leader in there, someone the others look to for guidance and hope. He says knowing that we're working on the outside, that we haven't forgotten them, is what keeps everyone going. I talk to Dolores too. I call her every week to update her on our progress, to tell her anything I've learned about Clint and his condition. She's become a kind of partner in this work, helping me with research and outreach, connecting me with people who might have useful information. She still hopes I'll find a way to bring Clint back to her, and I still promise her that I will. I don't know if that's a promise I can keep, but I'm going to die trying. Alma and I have become close over the past 6 months. Not romantic. We're both too messed up from our experiences for anything like that. But something like family. We drive together when we can, watch out for each other when we're on the road alone, talk each other through the nightmares and the flashbacks and the moments when the weight of what we know becomes too heavy to bear. She understands what I've been through in a way that no one else can, and I understand her the same way. We're bonded by the void, by the thing we survived together, by the work we've committed ourselves to. I'm still driving trucks. I have to make a living somehow, and it's the only skill I've got. But I don't drive the same way I used to. I don't lose myself in the miles anymore. Don't let the road swallow me up the way I did before. I stay alert, stay connected, stay aware of my surroundings and the people in my life. I've rebuilt my relationships with my girlfriend and my sister, started visiting my father more often in his nursing home, made an effort to be present in my life instead of always chasing the next load. The road tried to take me once, and it almost succeeded. I'm not going to give it another chance, but I also know that I'm not safe. None of us are. The void is still out there. The dark truck is still hunting, and every time I drive through a thin place I can feel the boundary pressing against me. looking for a crack it can slip through. I've seen too much to ever feel secure again. I know what's underneath the highway, what's waiting in the spaces between the miles, and I know that sooner or later, it's going to come for me again. Last week, I was driving through southern New Mexico on my way to a pickup in El Paso. It was late at night, the highway was empty, and I was passing through that same stretch of I-10 where everything started, the place where I lost my mile markers and found my way into the void. I was being careful, staying alert, watching for any signs that something was wrong. The mile markers were all there, counting up normally, no gaps or loops or wrong numbers. The radio was working, the traffic was light, everything was exactly as it should be. I started to relax, started to think that maybe I'd made it through without incident, that maybe the road was going to leave me alone this time. That's when I saw the headlights in my mirror, a single set, sitting about a quarter-mile back, keeping pace with me, not getting closer, not falling behind, just following, the way I'd been followed before, on the night when everything changed. I watched those lights for a long time, waiting to see if they would do anything, waiting to see if the dark truck had found me again. But they just stayed there, steady and patient, matching my speed and my movements like a shadow that had learned to drive. I picked up my radio and keyed the mic. "This is Rames, westbound on I-10. I've got a vehicle on my tail. Anyone else seeing this?" Static. Silence. And then faint but clear, a voice I didn't recognize. "Keep your lane, driver. You're not alone." I felt the words hit me like a punch to the chest. The same message I'd heard in the void, the same phrase Clint had used to guide me through the darkness. It was a warning, or a welcome, or something in between, a reminder that the road was always watching, and that I was never as free as I thought I was. I drove the rest of the way to El Paso with those headlights behind me, never getting closer, never falling back. When I pulled into the truck stop to wait for my morning pickup, they were gone, vanished, the same way the convoy had vanished every other time I'd stopped moving. I sat in my cab and watched the empty road for a long time, wondering if I'd imagined it, wondering if the void had sent me a message or a threat or something I didn't have words for. I don't know what it means. I don't know if the road is coming for me again, or just reminding me that it can any time it wants. But I know that I'm not going to run from it. I'm not going to hide or pretend or give up the work I've committed myself to. I'm going to keep driving, keep fighting, keep trying to free the people who are trapped in the void. If the road wants me, it's going to have to take me, and I'm not going to make it easy. Clint told me once that the key to surviving in the void was to keep fighting, to refuse to give up no matter how hopeless things seemed. He said the moment you stopped struggling was the moment you started to fade, to lose yourself, to become part of the nothing that filled in all the spaces. I think about those words a lot these days, when the work gets hard and the losses pile up, and I wonder if I'm making any difference at all. But I also think about the drivers we've saved, the ones we've guided through the shimmer and back to their lives. I think about Dolores and the hope I've given her, the knowledge that Clint is still out there fighting. I think about Alma and the network we've built, the community of survivors who are working together to understand the void